I'm Senator Malcolm Byrne. I'm extending apologies on behalf of our Chair, Deputy Niamh Smith, who unfortunately, due to illness, can't be here with us today, but thank you very much for coming along. Senator Marie Sherlock will be attending today in substitution for Senator Annie Hoey, and we do have, as I said, apologies from Deputy Smith and also Deputy Chris Andrews, and I've been informed that Deputy Mairead Farrell will be attending the meeting as well. Just before we go into the opening statements, we've just to deal with some of our own committee business. Can I take it that the draft minutes of our meeting of the 27th of February 2024 formally agreed and there are no matters arising? Agreed? Okay. The meeting of this committee today is to consider governance and culture issues at RTE, and we are meeting with the trade union groups to discuss those issues. The Joint Committee is empowered to consider legislation, policy, governance, expenditure and administration of the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media, or a state body for which that department is responsible, and RTE is such a body. I would like to take the opportunity at the outset of the meeting, particularly given the issues that we're discussing, to request that members and witnesses refrain from discussing individual cases, including those that may be the subject of legal proceedings. It's envisaged that today's proceedings will remain policy focused. So while people can refer in a general sense, but please don't, and this applies to members in particular, please don't identify any specific individual cases. And I do wish to explain some limitations in relation to parliamentary privilege and the practice of the Houses as regards references they may make to other persons in their evidence. So if you bear with me just a moment to go through the legal terms and conditions, as they say. The evidence of witnesses physically present or who give evidence from within the parliamentary precincts is protected pursuant to both the Constitution and statute by absolute privilege in respect of the presentation you make to the committee. However, you are expected not to abuse this privilege, and it is my duty as Cathaoirleach to ensure that this privilege is not abused. Witnesses are again reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. It is imperative that you comply with any such direction. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way to make him or her identifiable. I would like also to remind members again of the constitutional requirements that members must be physically present within the confines of Leinster House to participate in public meetings. I will not permit a member to attend where they are not adhering to the constitutional requirement, and where a member is attending remotely as such, please confirm that you are attending from Leinster House before making any contribution via Microsoft Teams. Any member who attempts to attend from outside the precincts will be asked to leave the meeting. I would also emphasise to members and witnesses alike that it is imperative that today's meeting is conducted in a fair and respectful manner at all times. I will intervene in any exchanges where I deem this not to be the case. So there are the terms and conditions out of the way, but to thank our witnesses for coming along today. We did feel, we have obviously been dealing with issues around culture and governance at RTE before this committee, as you'll be aware, and this committee has been particularly focused on the long-term future of broadcasting, but indeed the media within Ireland. So we do feel that it is important that we would hear the voices of staff and the representative organisations before this committee. And therefore I'd like to welcome the following witnesses here to Committee Room 4. Seamus Dooley, who's been with us many times before, who's the Irish Secretary from the National Union of Journalists. And can I congratulate Seamus on his recent elevation as Offaly Person of the Year. M.O. Kelly, who is the Chair of the Dublin Broadcasting Branch of the NUJ. Brian Nolan, the Assistant General Secretary of the Connect Trade Union. John Reynolds, electrician, camera technician, RTE and shop steward with Connect Trade Union. Teresa Hannock, who is the Divisional Organiser, Services Division for SIP2. Zach Sloper, who's the SIP2 shop steward and chair of the SIP2 committee in RTE. Brendan Byrne, the Regional Officer with Unite the Union. The format of today's meeting is such that I'll ask our witnesses to give an opening statement of a maximum of 5 minutes, and that will then be followed by questions from members of the committee. And as you're probably aware, the committee may publish the opening statements on its webpage if that's agreed. So I propose that we will now proceed with the opening statements. And I'd like to invite Seamus on behalf of, it's Emma's going to make the presentation on behalf of the NUJ. So Emma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oireachtas, and thank you for inviting us here today. I'm chair of the Dublin Broadcasting branch of the NUJ. This is a voluntary role that I undertake as an RTE employee. I'm accompanied by Seamus Dooley, Irish Secretary. The voice of staff has been missing from discourse in this chamber, so we're grateful for this opportunity to express the anger and frustration of NUJ members in RTE and also their views as to the future. It's not possible to address the issues before you in isolation from the climate under which RTE has been forced to operate under for a long number of years and continues to operate under. RTE has been starved of necessary funding for decades by successive governments. When we, the staff, spoke out over the summer, it was in direct response to the immediate crisis, but the real wellspring was the deep frustration and powerlessness we have felt for years as a result of this severe underfunding. For years, we have struggled as best we could, striving to deliver quality output for the public as budgets were slashed. Away from any media glare, we in the NUJ have fought around issues such as gender equality and against excessive salaries and perks at the top. We called in 2019 for a cap on salaries. We also called for the abolition of things like the €25,000 executive car allowance, and also years before that we called for a review of employment contracts and contracts for service in RTE. We look forward to publication of the 2 expert reports. They're already overdue, but we're very concerned at the insistence that funding decisions are being delayed while RTE continues to teeter on the brink of disaster. The licence fee model is no longer fit for purpose. We all know that. Public service media in this country urgently needs to be supported by a new funding model that is sustainable but also equitable for the paying public. The level of funding needs to be adequate. Most government and opposition politicians have, over the summer months and since then, expressed their strong support for public service broadcasting, but without adequate funding, those words are hollow. In relation to future plans for the organisation, as outlined in the New Direction Strategic Vision document, staff are concerned that the organisation is in effect being held to ransom. The deal seems to be that in return for some movement on funding, RTE must cut its workforce by 1/5 and outsource a significant proportion of the work currently done in-house by people in proper jobs to the private sector. 400 jobs are to be suppressed. That's 400 fewer full-time jobs in this wider creative sector for the future, for young people coming out of college, for example. We are concerned that those jobs will be replaced by mostly precarious short-term contracts in the private sector, where workers move from short-term contract to short-term contract with no right to things like pensions or holiday pay or maternity leave. This is an environment that especially damages women. We're fully supportive of a thriving, growing independent sector, but we do not believe that this should be achieved at the expense of jobs in RTE. None of the governance failings or disgraceful excesses at RTE exposed since the summer had anything to do with the size of RTE or with us, its ordinary staff. The NUJ fears that this crisis is being used to drive through an entirely different agenda, the privatisation of large swathes of RTE, and this is something that we will oppose. The use of bogus self-employment contracts is a stain on RTE's reputation. The systematic misclassification of workers was an attempt to keep staff costs down, denying workers fundamental rights. While trade unions have sought an industrial relations solution to the issue of bogus self-employment, there are workers in RTE who are being forced to pursue legal options in the face of an obstinate employer. And looking to the future and the new strategic plan, and despite all the debate over the summer, we now look at the prospect of RTE being driven further into the arms of the commercial sector, being forced to move further down the road of becoming a commissioning house. We feel we've learned nothing from Dee Forbes's first folly when she shut down young people's programmes and outsourced the creation of all programming for young people. Under the new DG, we see plans to dismantle a further 1/5 of the organisation via the replacement of content currently made in-house with material sourced from the private commercial sector. And we believe that this is sending RTE further down the wrong road. Thank you, Corry.
Thank you very much. Seamus, are you making an opening statement, or is this Emma's on behalf of the NJ?
That's Emma is the chair of the branch, and I felt it's appropriate. I've been before this committee many times that you should hear the voice of the staff.
Well, your voice, as you know, Seamus, is always welcome at this committee. So the next is Brian Nolan on behalf of the Connect Trade Union.
Chair and members of the committee, as you will already be aware, the two larger unions in RTE, the NUJ and SIP2, will share their reports on the events of the past for which no workers are responsible. And you will see and how they see the future for workers as per the new direction for RTE strategic plan. However, one of the major issues of the past has been the deliberate use by RTE of precarious employment strategies, in particular bogus self-employment. And it is the position of all unions that this cannot form any part of the future employment strategies within RTE. Connect in the past produced a number of publications on bogus self-employment, and therefore we've been requested to outline the negative effects this has had on workers in RTE, based on their experience in other sectors, particularly in construction. As a result of representation made by workers and some individual cases taken by employees, RTE has already commissioned the Eversheds report in the past. Perhaps the most glaring finding was that of 433 outsourced contracts reviewed, 157 were deemed not to be contracts for service but contracts of service, i.e. basically these people were really fulfilling the role of direct employees. It was clear that in the case of these 157 employees that RTE had misclassified these workers as per the Code of Practice for determining employment status commissioned by the Government and issued by the Workplace Relations Commission. This has resulted in further investigations by Scope and other employment contracts in RTE, which is ongoing. It is worth noting that the figure of 36% is almost as high as the 39% reached by Connect Trade Union in their investigations in the practice in comparable sectors such as the construction sector. So what does the practice of bogus self-employment mean for workers, and what kind of workers does this affect most? Well, bogus self-employment disproportionately affects young workers and female workers. It circumvents workers' rights such as, but not limited to, sick leave, maternity leave, paternity leave and annual leave. It shifts risks onto workers, it erodes training and opportunities to acquire new skills, it undermines pay and conditions, it undermines health and safety and workers' well-being, as bogus self-employed workers are less likely to report workplace issues. Bogus self-employment workers are less likely to secure loans and mortgages, thus affecting their ability to purchase a home, thus contributing to other crises such as the homing crisis. All of the above issues have been reported to trade unions at RTE, in particular by younger and female workers. So the future of RTE, the future direction document states that 1. Commissioning outsourced work will increase by 50%. This will ensure more work for the gig economy and more bogus self-employment, and is contrary to the government principles signed up to on the public service agreements which commit to public services being provided through direct labour. RTE is a public service broadcaster, and while not party to the public service agreements, are broadly aligned to them. 2. The document also states that RTE will cut the number of direct employees by 20%, while outsourcing, as explained above, which is unacceptable and of questionable value for taxpayers' money. 3. Regarding taxpayers' money, evidence has in the past been presented to Oireachtas committees that bogus self-employment costs the state over $1 billion annually. Adding to this will not help RTE or the state. 4. The document puts a lot of emphasis on new technology, but it should be put on the public record that workers in RTE have always cooperated with the use of new technology. The future of public broadcasting lies in a properly funded and resourced sector with good, secure jobs for workers who know they are safe to raise and investigate issues of public concern without the threat of insecure, precarious employment that could hinder their work contrary to the public good. As billionaire moguls by both traditional and new social media outlets to promote their agenda, an independent public service that can report without fear or favour in a necessary counterbalance. The workers in RTE, while willing to play their part, cannot be held responsible for the extravagant and lavish wrongdoings of those at the top, all of which have been well documented. All this while workers engage in genuine efforts on pay, cost reduction, etc., to secure the future of RTE and the public sector broadcasting. We suggest that any future for RTE shouldn't rely on the bogus practices of precarious practices of bogus self-employment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brian. The next presentation is Teresa Hannock on behalf of SIP2. Teresa.
Thank you, Chair. SIP2, Chairperson and members of the committee, SIP2 welcome the opportunity to appear before you today. SIP2 is the largest trade union in Ireland and represents the largest and most diverse membership within RTE, including workers in administration, operational, technical and directing grades, musicians and actor members of Irish Equity, which is an affiliate of SIP2. An extremely large proportion of our members earn less than the average industrial wage. The current crisis in RTE, brought about by the revelations in the summer of 23, posed serious questions about RTE in terms of trust, corporate governance, corporate culture and transparency. For several years, our members have had deep misgivings relating to the governance of RTE. They've had to deal with various crises that resulted in job losses and pay cuts, while being informed by management that everyone in the organisation will be treated the same. We cannot overstate here today the sense of betrayal our members felt when the disclosures in 2023 revealed that not everyone was treated the same. Not everyone felt the pain of pay cuts and other changes. Our members are proud of the work they do in RTE, the national broadcaster. SIP2 and its members support the requirement for a public service broadcaster for the benefit of democracy and our society. As stakeholders, our members must be part of any discussion that can improve this service for the people of our country. In November 2023, our members read about the RTE Management Strategic Vision Plan, a new direction for RTE in the media. Once again, our members found out about their future through leaks in the media before being told directly by their employer. The announcement of 400 job losses sent shockwaves across RTE, and rumours spread like wildfire about where these job losses would be. Our members have gone through previous change plans before, and the cuts always seem to impact our membership, probably more so than any other of the union members. Since the announcement, there has been no information or detail as to where these 400 job losses are to come from. Our members were told that 168 of the 400 job losses will come from natural wastage by way of retirements, etc. The Director General stated publicly that news and current affairs will not be affected by these job losses, but he has not indicated if any other areas will be affected, which would suggest that the bulk of these 400 job losses would more than likely come from operational areas. Most of the workers in these areas are SIP2 members. Our Irish Equity members in Fair City have been dealing with suggestions that the production will be outsourced to an independent production company. While this has not happened, they have been informed that there will be no filming in July or August of this year. This is happening so that management can use the technical staff to cover the European Football Championship, the Olympic Games and the GAA Championship, all of which require huge resources. This is a new development. This has never happened previously, even though these events have been broadcasted before. The national broadcaster has a duty under its public service broadcasting remit to produce drama like Fair City. Our members in Irish Equity are extremely disappointed and distressed with this reduction in filming, and they believe that RTE management consider them second-class employees and expendable if savings need to be made. It would seem to an outside observer that when money needs to be saved, Fair City and drama are easy targets. The RTE Concert Orchestra is central to RTE fulfilling its public service broadcasting remit. The orchestra is a vital part of the arts, music and education ecosystem in Ireland. The RTE National Symphony Orchestra was transferred to the National Concert Hall in 2022, and our members in the RTE Concert Hall or Concert Orchestra are extremely concerned about their future. The orchestra performed to over 69,000 live audience members last year, as well as many hundreds of thousands of listeners of the orchestra's broadcasts in Ireland, across the EU as part of the EBU broadcast network and worldwide on radio, television and online. The orchestra works with both young and established Irish and international artists of the highest quality. It is a significant cultural asset in Ireland, and its place in RTE's future strategic planning should be of great importance. RTE has been moving slowly into the 21st century. New technology has been embraced by our members, and the results and output to the public has been noticeable. New studios, production models and investments have all been welcomed enthusiastically. However, it is quite clear that RTE and our members need more. Our members tell us that the new studio in the organisation is falling apart, and it is an extremely difficult and stressful situation to work in. There are concerns about the vague references in the new direction to automation and AI and how that would affect staffing levels going forward. While our members welcome investment in technology and skills, there is no detail regarding what that means for the workers in those areas. All they do know is that the new direction states there will be a 20% reduction in headcount. But as to who or where and to what impact it will have on workers, there are no details. There is also a reference of a 50% increase in commissioning spend by 2028 of independent productions as part of a hybrid production model. Again, we have no information on what that means for our members in RTE. Our members welcome the opportunity to address other concerns that they all recognise within the organisation, including slow, backdated administrative process, poor governance and concentration on commercial activities as opposed to public service broadcasting. But it is extremely difficult to engage constructively with an employer who launches an ambiguous document labelled a strategic vision for the future with no real detail on where these 400 job losses will come from, nor how they will be achieved, and nothing on what could be the implications on the lives of the workers that are left behind. There are real, genuine concerns for our members. We have a real opportunity, if management engage constructively, to get this right and address these problems within RTE. SIP2 and our members believe that this can only be done with proper engagement and not by setting up multiple working groups which don't fully address the issues and have little or no ability to effect real change in the cultural corporate governance. Transparency that is needed in RTE, and above all, rebuilds trust in the national broadcaster. I'm just conscious of the time, and I know my other colleagues have gone through the bogus self-employment, but I just think it's important if I'll skip a few pages of the article where it means to actors. Actors have only recently become first employees, but they do not have a contract of indefinite duration, despite some of them working in the drama for over 20 years. We know from media reports that RTE has settled claims by several actors from Fair City on their claim for a contract of indefinite duration. This practice of not dealing with it collectively but settling claims with a secrecy clause has led to division, and it creates a difficult environment for these workers who must agree to RTE having first call when it comes to them being available for work outside of RTE. And to explain what that means, as an actor, I must seek permission before accepting any offer of work, and this is done with the executive producer. The executive producer confirms if it is appropriate for the actor to accept such an engagement, and the actor must accept the executive producer's decision as final. There is no appeal. It is difficult not to see this as an example of how actors are controlled by RTE. They have 2 months this year of no work, and they're still going to face this. Chairperson, we do thank you for having SIP2 appear here, but the uncertainty must end for our members. What our members want is full transparency and the creation of an action plan for the national broadcaster, which places a commitment to public service at its centre and not just a slash and burn plan that threatens to reduce staffing levels and terms and conditions of employment. Thank you.
Teresa, thank you very much. And then finally, Brendan Byrne on behalf of Unite.
Chair, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee on behalf of Unite the Union. Our comments will focus on the second matter being considered by the committee, namely the processes and procedures relating to the misclassification of workers' employment status and impact thereof. Unite the Union represents a small number of craft workers in RTE who have the protection of permanent full-time contracts. Unite is part of the trade union group in RTE, and our members stand in solidarity with all workers whose employment was misclassified by RTE, who are known as bogus self-employed. The employment status section of the Department of Social Protection scope is currently investigating whether or not 695 RTE workers should have been classified as full-time employees. It is our view that it would be useful if the committee could have facilitated workers affected by misclassification of employment in RTE to address the committee. We understand that the committee has received legal advice to the effect that it has no power to mandate workplace grievances. However, allowing workers to outline their experiences would not have placed any onus on the committee to mediate, but could have better informed the committee deliberations on this issue. In Unite's experience, bogus self-employment is a feature across a range of sectors. While this hearing relates to journalists working for RTE and other persons, this practice is particularly widespread in construction and is also prevalent in other areas of the economy. Bogus self-employment, like other forms of precarious working, impacts on workers, employees, employers and wider economy. It enables inequality in the workplace where one worker is employed on a permanent contract and enjoys all the associated benefits, while other workers in the same or equivalent role has their employment misclassified and is denied these benefits. It limits workers across access to benefits such as pension, holiday pay or illness cover, and those enjoy fewer protection against unfair dismissal or discrimination in the workplace. Employers who misclassify workers as self-employed or who engage in other forms of precarious employment have an unfair competitive advantage over other employers. The non-payment of employers' PRSI not only reduces the money available to the Social Insurance Fund, it also reduces individual workers' social insurance entitlements. The effect of this is that the individual worker concerned and wider society are effectively subsidising the employer business costs. Some years ago, the Irish Congress of Trade Union estimated that bogus self-employment in the construction sector alone cost the exchequer 80 million per annum, and the figure is now likely to be significantly higher. In 2021, Unite put forward the following proposals as part of our submission to the Committee on Social Protection, Community and Rural Development and the Islands in response to their draft recommendation on bogus self-employment. Establishment of a presumption of employment where an employee or employment relationship should be presumed to exist unless it can be proven otherwise. This means that the burden of proof in the event of a dispute relationship must be on the employer rather than of the worker. Updating of the Code of Practice on determining employment status to reflect new forms of bogus self-employment and precarious working. The Code of Practice should be put on a statutory footing. Establishment of a dedicated and appropriate resource unit within the Workplace Relations Commission to carry out in-house investigation, on-site inspection and adjudicating functions relating to employment status. Development of standards, definitions of the terms employee and worker to be incorporated into all relevant legislation. Extension of the look-back periods acceptable to breaches of employment law to 6 years, putting them in the same footing as the limitation period acceptable to other areas of contract law. A number of these proposals were reflected in the committee's final recommendation, including putting the Code of Practice on a statutory footing, establishing a dedicated resource employment status within the Workplace Relations Commission, and developing standards, definitions of the term employee and worker and applying them to all employment legislation. While the current committee hearing relates specifically to governance and culture issues at RTE, we know that the practice of misclassification of workers' employment status is not confined to the national broadcaster, We would therefore urge the committee to consider endorsing the above recommendations which, if implemented by the current or future government, will go a long way towards addressing bogus self-employment and other forms of precarious workers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our witnesses. And our committee is very appreciative of you coming in, and indeed I think you'll be aware that our committee has expressed our solidarity with members of the committee and for the staff in RTE over the revelations in recent months, and I think the committee collectively has always been very appreciative of the content that has been provided by RTE, so we can understand the difficulties that staff have faced, and also the anger that was felt, and that's why it's important to have you here today. So we're now going to proceed with questions and answers. Each members will know the speaking order. Each member has 10 minutes for questions and answers, and if there's a specific person that you wish to pose a question to, if you can identify them, or if anyone wants to specifically respond, just to raise your hands. But again, it's 10 minutes, and Deputy Christopher O'Sullivan is first.
Here, look, and again, thank you to staff and obviously their representatives and unions for attending today. We're coming up in almost a year now since the payments to Mr. Tubridy came into the limelight, and the first sessions, I suppose, in relation to these payments and the following situation that followed, I suppose. And I think it's not good enough that it's taken us almost a full year to get staff and staff representatives into committee to hear from you. So I'm sorry that it's taken that long, but I'm really glad that you're here now and that we're here to hear from you. And I do certainly take on board and hear quite loud and clearly there's a kind of a desperate plea from staff and union representatives for the future funding model to be sorted, to be decided. I think it's fair to say that most of the members of this committee have been quite strong in that a decision has to be made sooner rather than later. I know we're waiting on 2 reports, but that's also gone on too long, and that needs to be decided. So I just wanted to say that at the outset. But because I suppose one of the main reasons for this session happening is that we haven't heard staff voices yet from the issue arising around the payments to Mr. Tubridy, right through to the massive exit packages that were paid. We haven't heard your voices through that. So if you wouldn't mind, I might start. We've heard, I suppose, your strong statements in protests at RTE. We've heard strong statements on the media, but you haven't had a chance yet to read your opinions, I suppose, into the record of this committee. So I'm wondering if staff in particular might take this opportunity to describe how you felt during this period, from it emerged, these payments, from the barter accounts right through to the exit packages. I just want to give you this opportunity, I suppose, to describe how it made you feel. And we heard a lot of statements from members of the executive board saying that they understood the staff and they understood how this affected morale within RTE. But I'd like to give you this opportunity maybe to say a few words on that. It's any of the staff, RTE staff.
Emma?
Thanks very much, Deputy O'Sullivan. Well, like the summer was devastating for staff and very upsetting, but it was also like a dam bursting, because we were very aware of what was going on in RTE for a long time before that. We had, in our own way, without, as I said, out of the glare of the media, nobody seemed that interested, but we were fighting internally in RTE on a number of fronts, and we didn't feel we were being listened to. So the summer, when all this broke, it was like a dam bursting for us. It was upsetting, but I want to say here as well is that we really hoped during the summer, when we spoke out, when like colleagues of mine were very brave. I could speak as chair of the broadcasting branch, but other colleagues of mine came forward very bravely and spoke just in their personal capacities. But we all really, really hoped, and this is why a lot of us spoke out, is we hoped that this would be a catalyst for change and that this would lead to improvements, and that finally some of the issues that we'd been railing against for so long would be addressed. And so now our concern is that we're months on, as you said, almost a year on. And while there has been changes and there have been some welcome changes, we still feel that we are flailing and we're getting nowhere. And I have to bring it back to funding. You know, it's a daily struggle. In RTE, in the newsroom where I work, we struggle still. We struggle to do our jobs with, you know, we can't get the most basic equipment. I mean, going into the newsroom, you know, sometimes it's like a lottery as to which printer is working. You know, is 42 working today? No. Try 71. No, 71 isn't working either. You know, these are the things we face. Our crews are driving old cars, no sat-nav. The building we work in is falling apart. It's a listed building. It's part of our heritage, national heritage, but it hasn't been invested in for years. So, like, as I say, months on, we're still in the same bind as we were over the summer. And we really, at this stage, would urge you all to do all you can to address the issue of funding, the model of funding, but also the level of funding. That's the most important thing.
That point is made loud and clear. We actually have to take that on board. Yep.
Thank you, Deputy. I suppose from a SIPTU point of view and from the workers that I represent, when this was all revealed and everything else post, the anger was palpable and we were very, very disappointed. Only 2 or 3 years previous, we'd been asked to take a pay cut during the pandemic when other members of staff, other contractors were being paid huge amounts of money. We were being asked to take a pay cut. But I will stress that this has been going on now for as long as I've been working in RTE, which is nearly 3 decades. We have, every few years, there's a crisis. Every few years we're looking for money. Every few years RTE's coming out with the poor mouth saying we've no money, we can't do this, we can't do that. And we've had enough now at this stage, and we really just want it sorted.
Okay, and look, I appreciate that, and that message is certainly heard loud and clear. Can I ask, any of the RTE staff that are here today, were any of you ever on these bogus self-employment contracts? Anyone here?
No.
Okay.
I was very lucky. I came into RTE on a 1-year contract of employment and then I was made permanent, but I have worked for many years alongside colleagues and friends. Some of them are here today.
Exactly. That follows on to my next question. Unfortunately, they probably won't have an opportunity to address this, but I'd love to hear, to the best of your ability, to kind of represent how being on those bogus self-employment contracts, how they felt, you know, not being entitled to sick leave, maternity leave, paternity leave, annual leave. What was the general kind of sense when you're working alongside people doing the exact same job who are entitled to those entitlements?
Well, I'll do my best to speak on behalf of, I have for long years worked closely with colleagues on these bogus self-employed contracts. And I remember the first time I heard a colleague describing, a lot of the time we didn't know, because you're just working with colleagues and you think they're the same as you. You assume that they're on similar conditions. But I remember the first time I heard of a colleague who started telling me about his employment conditions, and I was completely shocked because at the time I had been looking into bogus self-employment in the construction industry around schools being built. And I remember saying to him, but this is completely wrong. You should be an employee. And my colleague got very upset and I could see the stress and strain, and I had to apologise to him in the end because he was so upset and he was saying, I don't want to talk about this because he was under such strain. I've also spoken to colleagues, female colleagues, who've told me about the times that they went out on maternity leave, 3 times in the case of one colleague who never got any maternity pay. And they were really shocking things for me to hear because as far as I'm concerned, and everybody in the area I work with, those colleagues are colleagues straight up, just like us, but they were treated differently. I think.
Yeah. I'm 25 years a trade union official, 20 years dealing with RTE. One of the first things that I was involved in RTE was a process called the good body process, which hasn't been mentioned at all in any committee, which is when RTE regularised, under pressure from the trade union group, bogus self-employment. And then, having done that, and I remember with the former trade union group secretary, Donald Brennan, touring the country, sitting down with people, examining their new contracts of employment. The same bad practice was slowly introduced by Stealth again. And in 2008, 2009, the group of unions began a campaign to stop that practice again. So the issue of bogus self-employment is something which has come up again and again. And it is something that we have resisted. Reference has been made to the employment status group and the guidelines for employment. What's interesting is that that was introduced in 2001, directly as part of the negotiations with Congress under the Programme for Prosperity and Fairness. One of the things that informed those negotiations was the experience in RTE. But the reality is that the trade union group has been crying in the wilderness in this House for action on bogus self-employment for a long time.
All right, I'm going to move on. I appreciate that, and it sounds horrible. It's conducive to a horrible working environment and a lot of conflict, I'd imagine, and tension within that working environment. And are there still bogus self-employment contracts within RTE?
I can't say for definite. I don't think there are. I think that well, first of all, we can only take at face value the assurances we give. I leave it to the committee to decide whether you trust them. I think we have, under the process that was put in place by the trade union group, a significant number of people were actually secured employment. The next bit of it is the scope investigation, which I'm sure there'll be other people who will ask questions on that, and that process is one which is between RTE and the people who are the subject of those determinations. Deputy, we don't have any knowledge of that process.
That's okay. I'm under pressure. I suppose my last couple of questions then is, do you have confidence in the current executive board, or whatever they're described as now, transitional board, executive board, that they will eliminate this practice? Do you have confidence in a HR team that is pretty much made up of the same personnel, that they will eliminate this practice, and not just this practice, but this practice of exit packages, which caused all this hurt and pain within RTE staff?
I'm not required to have confidence. I'll deal with whoever I have, and I think I know the difference between cynicism and scepticism, and I'll judge them, and I'll judge the current Director General by his performance.
And I know you have to be careful. Would anyone else like to comment on that final question in terms of how you feel about the current team? We must remember that there are members of this new executive board that presided over payments to Mr. Tubridy, exit packages.
I just have to, as a union official, I'd have to reiterate, and I'm sure every union official is going to tell you the same, as what Seamus has said. Doesn't matter, we've had the devil himself and put in front of it, we have to deal with him. What our members would say is it's time for action. The confidence and respect is earned. It's not just given, and it is the time for people to do it. And I think if people get down to resolving these issues in RTE, and less talk and more action would be far more preferable.
Fair enough, and that's understood. And I want to thank the witnesses again for coming. It's tough. You're describing an atmosphere within an organisation that I'm sure you're mad about, that you're passionate about, and it's not easy for you to come in here and make those really strong statements about what it was like. So I want to thank you for that.
Okay, thanks very much, Deputy O'Sullivan. Deputy Brendan Griffin.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon to all of our witnesses, and thank you for coming in. And I appreciate the submissions that you've made as well to the committee. And I'm conscious as well that you represent many workers at RTE. I'm also conscious that there are workers who don't feel represented by the unions and who feel somewhat disenfranchised. So perhaps, if I may, Chair, take the opportunity to try to give a voice to some of those workers. I had hoped that we could have heard directly from some of the people directly impacted by the bogus self-employment issue. According to advice from the OPLA, that wasn't possible, but I do want to acknowledge that we have had some written submissions accepted in private session, and they will become public documents, and there are others that will hopefully later. But I do want to just give yourselves and the public watching an extract of some of the submissions that we've received. This one is from Angie Mazzetti. This has been accepted by our committee. Bullying in RTE has been widespread over the decades. Threats not to renew contracts, threats not to grant contracts at all, but to have employees work continuously on flat rates without increments or pensions is a form of corporate bullying. The practice has to end. Telling a presenter they are not an employee, yet proudly displaying them as a voice or face of RTE is a form of corporate gaslighting. Human resource practice in RTE of not granting employment rights universally has been an issue as outlined above. The inability of various unions to secure employee rights for their members has not been exemplary, to say the least. The trade unions must be prepared to stand up to management to secure the rights of all the employees in RTE, including bogus self-employed and those on zero-hour contracts, and not a privileged few. How the proportion of people employed under bogus self-employed was allowed to be so large reflects very poorly on the unions. Estimated bogus self-employment is over 43%. Three-quarters of so-called contractors were found to be bogus self-employed. She later goes on to say, RTE as an organisation must be subject to compliance with human resource legislation, taxation and social protection law for its own employees and to companies it subcontracts to. Joey Kelly, another person who has made a formal submission.
I'll just remind the Deputy not to identify a specific individual.
This was agreed by the in private session, and this was something that was.
I don't think it was agreed to publish. If I'm correct,
Well, I have consent as well. Could I just say, in 2021, the Department of Social Protection contacted me asking to interview me on my employment status. RTE never contacted me regarding this. In 2022, I received a decision stating that I should have been an employee from the years 2012 to 2018. RTE paid my PRSI for those years. When trying to engage with the unions and RTE in this matter, I feel like I'm being totally ignored. I have emails dating back to 2022 with regards to asking SIP2. I've engaged with RTE in this matter personally recently. RTE are refusing to acknowledge that we were staff at the time without actually giving a reasonable explanation as to why we are not staff. Instead, they are using terms like no assumptions can be made. With regards to the procedures and proceedings relating to the misclassification of workers' employment status and impacts thereof, I want to show the process the staff members must go through in order to be heard by RTE. On the real-life impacts of people's lives, people don't have homes, pensions. It has impacted people's careers and their home life. These workers had to give up a lot personally. We usually had to work shifts over, others didn't have to when they were entitled to take time off, missing out on a lot of big family occasions like Christmas. It does take a toll on your mental health to have to deal with people who try to convince you that what you know to be true is not true. We had a public, very public declaration from Keith Walsh, the former 2FM DJ recently, who had hoped to be here today, who would like to have given his submission and felt that not being able to give his testimony to this committee was a trauma on top of trauma. There were his words. This is something that must be recognised. Another person who wishes to remain anonymous came to me. I worked exclusively for RTE for almost 25 years. Contract ended with no entitlement to lump sum or pension. 2 years later, the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection began a review of the PRSI and employment status in RTE. 5 months later, the decision of the deciding officer from the Department of Social Protection was that the employment of the person by RTE for 25 years was insurable under the Social Welfare Acts for all benefits and pensions at PRSI Class A. 4 months later, RTE appealed the decision through Arthur Cox solicitors. Then the Department of Social Protection, 4 months later, were awaiting full submission from RTE on that appeal. The person wrote to the DG about this matter, but has yet to receive a response. 3 further months passed before the case was assigned to an appeals officer. Another example, a person pointed out to management in RTE that they were working more days than staff and that they should be an employee. The person was refused. And they go on to say, for many reasons, which I'm unable to go into here due to environment and behaviour towards me at my place of work, I did not appeal to WRC LRC recommendation. 2022 and 2023, the Employment Status Investigation Unit Scope and Social Welfare Appeals Office deemed me to be an employee with PRSI status, Class A. All of this mental stress, physical illness and financial cost could have been avoided for both me and RTE back in 2008. I understand that RTE has paid my PRSI bill to the Department of Social Protection, but I am still waiting for the payment of my pension benefits, holiday pay and other job entitlements for 6.5 years. I was forced to be self-employed within the national broadcaster. I have received a solicitor's letter from RTE stating that they will vigorously defend any proceedings and will affix me with the cost of such defence. Surely RTE would not have paid my PRSI bill if it did not admit liability. Surely RTE should spend its money paying individuals like me instead of clocking up a huge bill with one of the biggest law firms in the country. I currently understand the legal cost is up to €74,000. The 6.5 years pension alone would mean that my future would be secure and that I would not have to work into old age. This is the only opportunity I have to describe my ordeal within the national broadcaster. Can I say we have another from a group of workers that give me this submission. We are a cross-section of misclassified workers in RTE. We have each been identified more correctly as employees either through the RTE Evershed reports or scope or revenue investigations. We have in total worked over a century of years for RTE with no employment benefits or protection to show for it. RTE tells the Oireachtas that RTE is working hard to remedy this, but tells us RTE will bring our PRSI contributions up to date over the course of the next 15 years. But our service will not be backdated. We will not get retrospection of other lost benefits. RTE will only offer us one 12-month employment contract now without full statutory protections or benefits or regular staff benefits. If we do not accept this, we are told by HR, take it or leave RTE. And this is part of the problem, this culture of fear and threat. If we get legal advice, RTE, hand our file to Arthur Cox. We do not know how RTE can publicly state at Oireachtas hearings that RTE have accepted the findings of both Evershed reports, but can then use public money to have Arthur Cox deny any and argue against those findings in court. RTE is now instructing deliberate reductions in work for many of us. This can minimise our ability to pay for legal representation and limit the potential WRC award, which is based on our earnings. We are being bullied with no recourse as we have no employment rights. We are let down by unions, SIP2 in all of our cases. We allowed decades of bogus self-employment and who now seem unable to negotiate against HR or support individuals who bring complaints. Many of us have not even been allowed to see our individual Evershed's determinations. How can RTE say this is transparent? After decades of loyal service, we are devastated by the sharp practice by HR and the inertia of SIP2. As it stands, many of us with decades of service will not be eligible under the voluntary redundancy scheme as we have no recognised service years. We are at risk instead of quietly disappearing from RTE at the end of one-year contracts currently offered. With no pension, no redundancy, the contract offered explicitly excludes protections under unfair dismissal. SIP2 do not seem to be able to do anything. Making matters worse, we have lived with this since 2017, worrying about how to pay our bills, how to deal with revenue if they backdate tax, working in a culture of fear in case we are simply disappeared. And this so-called resolution process is expected now to drag on for a further 15 years, according to RTE, during which time many of us will have reached retirement with no pension or will have simply vanished from RTE when annual contracts are not renewed. The financial and psychological damage to us and our families is a disgrace to RTE when all we have done is our jobs. We did our jobs and did them well because if we didn't, we would not have been renewed. We were only contractors. The employees in legal and HR were the ones who did not do their jobs, who made grave and sustained mistakes. We are the ones paying for their mistakes and they are bullying us so they can get away with it. Can I just say in the little bit of time I have left, I think it's important that all of those voices, and that's only a small sample of the voices that needed to be heard that I would have liked to have had sitting here before us today, but for one reason or another we're not allowed to be here today. Those people have to be heard. The unions have to do more to represent them. I know you have a difficult job, but these people can't be forgotten either. Neither can they be forgotten by members of the Oireachtas, and they have to be protected and their rights have to be fought for. Could I just say there are a number of questions that were brought to my attention. They were posted by Martin McMahon on Twitter at the weekend, but there are pertinent questions, and if there isn't time to answer them now, I think it would be helpful.
I'll allow you one or two questions, Deputy, but quickly.
I'll list the questions, let me take a short time. If the unions can't come back to me now, if you can provide answers to this committee on all or some of these questions, it would be very helpful. Workers were not at all involved in the Evershed's review. How did RTE, SIP2 and other unions select workers for the Evershed's review? The Evershed's review established a bogus self-employment rate of over 40%. Why weren't union members informed? On what legal authority are unions excluding hundreds of workers from redress for being self-employed by RTE, which is a criminal offence on the statute books? Why, and I can give you a copy of these in writing, Why isn't the full Eversheds legal advice, and this may be not for yourselves, and the extent of bogus self-employment in RTE before the Media Committee? This is something as a committee we need to pursue. What liability did the Eversheds review establish? The Eversheds review was an attempted cover-up of massive bogus self-employment in RTE. Why did the unions not call this out? I'm paraphrasing here. Union members who paid full subs for decades were given yellow pack is the word used here, contracts by RTE with the approval of unions after the Eversheds review. Will unions be refunding members the subs? And there's also a question in relation to the 396 workers dismissed by RTE. Keith Walsh would have been one of those people after the Eversheds review. It now, based on figures we have from the Taoiseach himself, 297 of those workers were employees at the time.
Okay.
And how is this going to be resolved? If the time isn't there today,
Deputy, we may come back because you're well over time. I will remind you that the format for today was agreed by this committee in private session. So, and it was agreed that rather than taking individual workers, that the representative bodies and unions would be the ones invited rather than inviting lots of individuals to come along. So just for the record, that is. But I will allow time for people to respond later. The next set of questions are from Deputy Imelda Munster, and you have 10 minutes.
Just direct my first question maybe to SIP2 and the members of the NUJ. Just from a trade union perspective, I suppose primarily the reason I'm not including the others is SIP2 have said you represent the vast amount of workers in RTE, and NUJ then represent journalists and journalism. But I just can't get my head around, from a trade union perspective, how so many workers, almost 700 workers, over what it appears decades, RTE were allowed to misclassify them, deny their rights as workers, and the unions appear to have done little or nothing. How did that ever happen from a union perspective, that the two unions who represent most of the workers stood back and allowed this happen? I mean, we're talking about, I think, up just under 700. There's possibly more. It's gone on for decades. The scandal that it is, whereby workers were denied pension rights, holiday pay, maternity leave, sick pay, every entitlement that any ordinary worker ought to be entitled. And you're the unions, you're the people they pay their union dues to week in, week out. So how was a scandal like that not tackled? I mean, to my mind, it came to the fore publicly primarily because of the whistleblowers and disclosures that were made. I can't recall for one instant, and I'm happy to be contradicted, of any big, massive union campaign calling RTE management to account. But can you just explain to the committee, how is it that workers' rights would be abused in such a way? And from testimony we've had and spoke to staff members myself, they felt that they've been ignored by the unions.
Yeah, I think we have come to a strange and curious pass where trade unions take a punishment beating for the actions of management. And I must say I find that disturbing, Deputy. I also think it flies in the face of evidence, including references that I've already given to you, that in fact 20 years ago we addressed the issue of bogus self-employment through a process involving a review. In January 2019, we gave evidence to the relevant committee at the time, including Patricia King and myself. It's probably, Chair, very impolite to quote yourself, but I did actually say I have long believed that lawyers should be avoided like the plague. Industrial relations matters should be settled through industrial relations process. And I criticised in particular the state for failing to deal with providing scope with adequate resources to investigate bogus self-employment. The Eversheds process came about. That legal review was not conducted by the NUJ or the trade union group, but was established as an independent body by Eversheds Sutherland. That was the firm appointed by RTE. We had no role in their appointment. In terms of the question that was asked by Deputy Griffith, in terms of who selected the workers. That was actually what was called a desktop investigation by them. The report, I mean, I actually think it would be useful for you to invite RTE in to explain. I'm not going to either defend or explain for RTE.
No, sorry, Mr. Dooley. I posed the question in the context, is it not the union's job to protect its members?
And the union did that, and a significant number of members secured contracts of indefinite duration as a result of that review. In addition,
significant as in, if you give me figures in comparison to say there's 700 that we know of, so how many?
In addition to that,
sorry, do you have figures for, you said significant numbers?
Sorry, I can't actually answer questions and listen to you.
But you said
time.
Significant numbers.
Yes.
I'm just asking you, what were those significant numbers?
I'll get back to you on those, because I know that there was around 85 in the first tranche, but we're getting confused.
Out of 700.
We're getting confused with two issues here, Chair. We are getting confused with the Evershed report and the current scope investigation, and they are two different things.
No, not at all. We accept the Evershed, not that we accept it. We know what the Evershed's report is about. We know that there are still hundreds upon hundreds of workers that have still not got their rightful entitlements. We know that the Director General has said in front of either it was our committee or the Public Accounts Committee that RTE had set aside 20 million to cover some of the expenses of the misclassification of workers and the denial of their rights as workers. And that's a significant amount, but we don't know if is that just to cover the PRSI entitlements, and there's no mention of pension entitlements or anything else that they were denied. But my question was posed, and I'd just like to hear from SIPTU too, is as a union, what protection did you afford, given that decades on they're still in the same precarious situation?
Chair,
so if I can ask, sorry, I'm asking the questions. If I can ask SIPTU for a response, please. We've got yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I would have to defer to my colleague Seamus as part of the TUG group, which we all are, and there's all the unions in here, representative bodies in RTE. We would have had the same call regarding the fear of bogus self-employment in RTE as Seamus would outline. My understanding, it goes back over 20 years there was concern about it. You're quite right, bogus self-employment is a terrible scourge and our society goes through. It can be difficult to find it out. As previously stated here, sometimes we don't know if people are or are they not. But this has been a campaign, and my understanding is according to my colleagues in the TUG, the TUG have been banging the drum on for many years and pushing the drum on it. And it is really, the concern is with the employment and our legislation in this country that keeps pushing at it. Like, there is a EU directive proposed to come in about bogus self-employment. I sat here in front of another committee regarding platform workers and gig work and how difficult it is to prove it. There are hundreds and thousands of people that are onto this. And my colleagues from both the Construction Unite and Connect will tell you the difficulties there. But it has been a process that has been gone, and that has been pushed by ICTU as well.
Okay, my point being, it must be very, very frustrating for workers to have this gone on for such a length, such abuse of their rights and their entitlements, and to have union representative and not to make any headway, or not to have, and for it to come to the fore through whistleblowers. But just in relation to the, you had said, made comment on the reduction in staff, the 20% reduction in staff, and that there were little or no communication from management in relation to that, despite the fact that I'd seen RTE's strategic new vision, and it had said that there would be improved staff communication, communication forum, engagement forum and leadership forum. It doesn't seem to have given much information by way of how these job losses are going to be targeted, other than through retirement. So in relation to that, and in relation to the work culture changes that we've all been promised we would see, and the reform that was promised, and whether or not members see that reform on a day-to-day basis, but solely in relation to that, the job loss and the little or no communication as regards who was going to suffer those. What would you like to say to the new Director General today in the context of this meeting, as to the the liaison with staff, the lack of information given, the work culture that is, the change in work culture, that if we go by this, we haven't seen much. And I'll bring in Unite and Connect in this as well, please.
Brent and Emma were signalling on that, but Imelda, it's up to you to...
Yeah, well, I'll go with Emma first and then...
Thank you very much, Deputy Munster. I mean, like, we haven't got much information, but at the same time, like, I feel we're seeing it happening. The information is coming to us from what we're seeing happening. And, you know, I'm concerned about speaking about this in the future tense, because it's not in the future tense, it's happening. I was contacted last week by a worker in RTE who told me that after 6 years working in the organisation, he's been told, that's it, goodbye, it's over. And he says, I have given 6 years of my life to this organisation, and that's it. I'm gone now, they're telling me. So it's actually happening. It's present tense. It's not future. It's happening. And we're seeing it happening. And I think the 40 that they're due to lose this year, I think they will lose those very easily by not renewing fixed-term contracts, like that person who's been working for 6 years. And just, I want to link this to the bogus self-employed, which is a disgrace what happened, but I don't think it's a coincidence that now at a time when the game is up with self-employed, bogus self-employed, RTE is now saying, right, we're farming out, we're cutting staffing by a fifth. That is moving jobs into the gig economy. It means RTE doesn't have to bother about things like diversity or, you know, equality or any of those messy things like holiday pay or maternity pay, because it'll be farmed out into the private sector. And it's been really tough, and it is tough policing good quality employment in RTE, but it's tougher still, and will be tougher still, trying to ensure that those same people have rights when they're out in the private sector.
Could you foresee that it would lead to another bogus self-employment type thing in the gig economy?
Well, yes. I mean, it may be bogus self-employed, or it'll be, and I've spoken to, people have contacted me who work in the independent sector, and it's a 3-month contract, it's a 9-month contract. You know, once you have children and your child is sick, you know, and you have to take days off, you're kind of told, well, look, thanks very much, but we've got somebody else for the next series.
Can I ask, from what you've seen so far, do you have confidence, and what you've just said, do you have confidence that the Director General, the new Director General, is actually listening to staff, and could you have full confidence going forward in reform, proper reform that's needed after the scandal of what we've been through?
Well, I think that very much depends on what goes on beyond the new Director General. He has a job to do. That's why we're in here, and we're very happy to be talking to the politicians, because all of this goes back to underfunding of RTE and the absolute requirement for a proper funding stream to be put in place. And that's what we want to focus on. So yes, I have confidence in Kevin Backhurst, but that doesn't mean I will agree with him. He has a job to do. I want that job to be a very different job. I don't want to see 1/5 of the workforce gone from RTE. I mean, I was thinking it's decimating RTE. It's actually worse. It's not 1 in 10. It's 1 in 5 jobs are going to go at the organisation, and I don't see any point in that. And again, I'll stress everything we went through in terms of the scandals, that had nothing to do with the size of RTE, and I see no rationale, really, for these cuts.
Chair, I've just one final, it's just a quick question to each of our witnesses, just in relation to the funding model, the new funding model that the government haven't actually given a commitment to on. Of all of the various types of funding model, which one would you think would serve the public broadcaster best? Would it be direct exchequer funding or a continuation of the licence fee? If each witness can give their opinion on
and just succinctly, please.
Direct exchequer funding, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next is Senator Marie Sherlock.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to all our witnesses here today. And I'm extremely conscious that it's been a very difficult time for RTE staff over the last 10 months, in terms, and also in terms of when we see that the greed and serious mistakes of a few have precipitated a crisis for the many within RTE. I also just want to acknowledge in the gallery here today that we have some former workers in RTE here as well, some who were bogusly self-employed and who are wronged by RTE. So important to acknowledge their presence here today. My questions relate first to the cuts that are effectively hanging over staff at the moment. And I think Emma used the words that you feel staff are being held to ransom in RTE at the moment because of the cuts that are being proposed. Can I ask exactly about your relationship, like as in the working relationship that is there with the Director General at the moment in terms of the communication? And I know the question has been asked about the confidence in the Director General, but the working relationship with the Director General at this point in time, how would you characterise that?
Well, communication has improved, certainly, and we welcome that. But action speaks louder than words, and we need to see change and action. And as I said already, like sometimes it's such a struggle to do our jobs because of the lack of resourcing, because of the broken down facilities that we're working with. And so that's what our focus is on. It's great to feel you have a listening ear, but if you're not seeing results, if change isn't coming, then, you know, that's not good enough.
Okay. Chair, could I say on that I've always be careful not to confuse access with influence. Yes. We certainly have access to the Director General. We have access to senior management. But in the current climate of uncertainty, both in terms of funding, lack of resources, there is an inertia in RTE. And one other point I would make is you will not find in any of the statements from the NUJ laying all of the blame at the former Director General, and I'm also not laying all the hope for the future on the current Director General. And I think that's important to say. The future of this organisation cannot be dependent on one person.
Sure. In terms of the Resolve report, it had to be commissioned on foot of the behaviour of certain management within the current affairs section. I want to ask, do you believe, and we have, when the Director General has been here at committee, we've asked him a number of times about this report. Do you believe that there are changes now happening on foot of the recommendations in that report?
The Resolve report related to a specific experience, which I was intimately involved in, but it is and you're not asking me to comment on the case.
But I believe that a human resource culture that, in particular, was prejudiced against women, and there was, you know, allegations of bullying that wasn't just confined to one individual.
And I don't
covered for that.
I don't believe that enough work has been done in that area. I believe, and I think in some respects it's unfortunate that we haven't got the HR report commissioned, the expert report. We need that report because it is a priority for all of the unions that culture is changed. And the Resolve report was disturbing, but it would be equally wrong to think that was the only area within RTE where there were concerns.
Sure, of course. And Emma, can I just ask, in terms of your own experience of the Current Affairs Department, like as in whether you believe changes or improvements have been made over recent months on foot of the recommendations, and there were some very clear recommendations and stark findings in that report?
I would reiterate what Seamus has said. I think it's too early to tell, really. You know, actions speak louder than words, and we need more time to pass to see really if things have changed.
Okay.
And Chair, just very briefly to say that I would credit the current management in current affairs specifically as improving, but I would say that throughout the organisation there's a hell of a lot more to be done.
Sure. I think one of the striking issues that we've seen in RTE over the past while is that while we're now looking at cuts coming into the future, there's currently shortfalls of staff. And I would like to hear from Zach and from John, and indeed from Emma as well, as to your experience as to the current staffing shortfalls and the resourcing issues that are currently within RTE. Because while the conversation is to make RTE a smaller organisation into the future, which I disagree with, I believe it has to be a bigger organisation, I'd like to hear about your direct experience of those staffing shortfalls at this point in time.
Well, Deputy, thank you for the opportunity. Our Senator, thank you for the opportunity. Certainly going into the summer, we're extremely busy in television and radio with multiple stuff going on, such as the European Championships, the Olympics and stuff like that. There is a culture of kind of not fixing the wall until it falls down, if that makes sense, right? So we can see that there's going to be a problem in 5 or 6 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks, and we'll wait until just before that problem appears to fix it staffing-wise. So, yes, staff are also doing, certainly in operations, are certainly doing a lot of overtime to try and get these jobs done. It's not like working in a factory where you'd have maybe 15 people doing the same job, and if one person goes sick, 14 people can pick up the slack. You have one person doing one job, and if that person goes sick, you're going to have black on output. You know what I mean? So we have to. That person has to be replaced. So there is a problem with staffing levels, certainly in television and radio, from what we've heard. We're battling on through and getting it done, but you know there is a need for more staff.
Okay, thanks, Zach and John.
Yeah, I echo what Zach has said. It's hard across the organisation. Sick leave is very difficult to cover. Holidays can be difficult to get because of staff shortages. I think what we've seen in the last couple of rafts of redundancies, pay cuts, is it's all being on the front line, and a lot of those positions were suppressed. They weren't replaced. So what's happened is staff on the ground have picked up the slack. A lot more work has fallen on their laps. They're doing more. There's also cross-grading going on and multitasking happening across the organisation. So certainly the stress and strain is felt there. And you don't mind, you've got, speaking personally, you've got the stability of a full-time job. But I can only imagine if you're on a bogus contract or if you haven't got that stability, how much more extra strain that is adding to you. And I think that was what we needed to come down here and say today, was that it is quite stressful environment working in broadcasters, short times, turnarounds, all that sort of thing. And when you've got stability, that's okay, but when you have the instability, bogus contract, you don't know, is your contract going to be renewed? And the difficulty, I suppose, across RTE and folks behind me would say that is, on the floor, we are a family. I've worked with a lot of the bogus employees, contractors, various different, and all the different contracts that are there. We're a family, we know each other. So seeing someone just disappear, not having their contract renewed, it's extremely difficult. It's another layer of distress in a already distressing place, and then to have the risk of redundancy hanging over. There are members who are applying for mortgages who have been refused or have had to get letters of comfort from HR because banking organisations are gone, or you gone. So even full-time people are feeling that pressure.
Sure, okay. And Emma, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I spoke about this already briefly, so I won't repeat myself, but I just want to add one point. I canvassed colleagues around these issues before I came in here today, and we're so stretched at the moment, and a number of people expressed fear about our coverage of all the elections that are coming up, because we're already absolutely stretched. And we're facing into elections like no other elections. We're going to have massive challenges. We're in a whole new environment in terms of disinformation. We're going to have the resources to have experienced journalists fact-checking. And there's real concern among colleagues in the newsroom as to how we're going to fulfil our public service remit, and that is to deliver balanced and fair and informative coverage in this completely new environment. Sure. And this concern that we don't have the resources, or we need the resources to be able to do that properly.
Sure, okay, thank you. Just want to ask about the bogus self-employment. I must say to some colleagues here, I look forward to your enthusiastic support when it comes to the transposition of the EU directive on bogus self-employment. When it has to be transposed here, and I'm a bit incredulous at some of the union blaming, but I do want to ask though about the conditions, and I think Seamus, you talked about it, decisions by stealth or bad practice by stealth that has been introduced over the years. Can you just, for the record, just I suppose, identify the number of reports that have been commissioned over the last 20 years? Yeah. Because I think the thing is, this is obviously management decisions that have led to the situation, not the unions.
I've mentioned the Goodbody report. I've mentioned the Evershed report, which was a legal review Following that, there was actually an appeal process at the insistence of the NUJ, and I've noted some Twitter comments in relation to the potential illegality of the process. That review was conducted by Peter Ward, Senior Counsel, and anyone who was dissatisfied with the outcome made their appeal to Peter Ward, Senior Counsel, one of the leading employer lawyers. There was then a follow-on independent review specifically in relation to retrospection. It is important to say for the record that anyone who wanted to appeal did not have to, that you weren't bound by that process. But the problem is, and I would echo the concern here, that RTE's insistence on engaging at a time of shortage, one of the top lawyers, legal firms in the company, is putting up significant challenges for anyone who goes in that route, and that's a major concern.
Okay, and Chair, I just have to, just to Teresa Hannock, you know, you talked very passionately about the situation that Fair City workers now find themselves in, and I think, Teresa, people are probably a bit incredulous at how RT can find it, you know, as a semi-state organisation, can have the level of bogus self-employment that it does. But of course, people come in as freelancers, so you might just very briefly describe how people come in as freelance actors, but then end up being bogusly self-employed.
Yeah, it is a profession, as you know, it's probably a precarious profession, and most actors are self-employed. There's all kinds of legal challenges when trade unions have tried to represent what are called self-employed, or people would say anti-competition laws has come in about unions representing it. But most people who join the acting profession, and it's a very difficult profession, I sometimes wonder how they do it, but they are there to bring us joy, they're there to bring us sadness, and they go out and do it. They come in because you're only a short-term character, you could be only here to be somebody buy something out of it, and it can be very difficult for people to get permanent employment, to be a regular character, and any difficulty, you could end up being written out, your character, with a terminal illness. So it is difficult, and the problem when it is this temporary work, what do they do for the rest of the months to find other work? And all that other work has to be approved because you are on this contract of indefinite duration. It happens to directors as well that are involved in that. Yeah. So it can be difficult.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. And the final question, Chair, is, and it's just, has any good come out of this crisis? I'd like to hear from the witnesses here.
I'd love to be to say yes, but I think that would be very foolish. It has been the most painful process, and I think the only one who have benefited from a number of TDs and senators who we might never have met otherwise.
Thank you very much. I leave that comment with you, and thanks, Senator Sherlock. The next substituting for Kieran Cannon, Micheál Carrigy.
Thanks, sir. Thanks very much, Chair.
Oh, have I got it?
Right, thanks very much, Chair. And I think the first thing to say, I want to welcome all the staff and the representatives who are coming here today. And I think one thing that needs to be made clear, that I know I, as a punter, a public rep, etc., I have full trust in the staff and in the quality of the product as a public sector broadcaster. And I think that's something that all of us of the committee, and I think it's important that we say that, and that goes back to the staff, that we have full trust in the quality as a public service broadcaster, and we need to support it. And particularly, as Emma has said, with elections coming up, we need to resource and make sure that trusted information is out there and that the public get. I think that's important to put that on the record. Just a couple of questions, and then I might go back. I think my colleague Deputy Brendan Griffin asked a number of pertinent questions with regard to the Evershed review, and with time at that didn't get an opportunity to reply, and maybe I might give some of my time that you might be able to reply to Deputy Brendan Griffin in relation to the Evershed's review. First of all, I suppose the RTD strategic vision, that's the future, and you've outlined some of the points you need to be put in place with regard to the future of RTE, but it reviewed allowances, grade structures, etc. So maybe you might give me your views on the discussions and what level of discussion took place between RTE, I suppose, management and yourselves, and indeed with regard to the expert advisory committee review, what sort of engagement was there with unions and staff with regard to that over the last number of months? I'll leave it open to
Well, in relation to the expert review group, we actually did have the opportunity to meet them. We had very intensive negotiation. It's a matter of regret we didn't have any engagement at all with the governance review group, and I think that's unfortunate because the two are relevant. And we used that as an opportunity to discuss some of the issues and concerns, Senator, that we had. So we await that report. I said this morning on Morning Ireland, I understood that the report had been furnished and that we would like to see it published as soon as possible. That seems to be a matter of debate. The Minister is waiting for the two reports to be published simultaneously. Bluntly, I don't see the reason for that. There's a lot of other things going on in HR at the moment in RTE. There's issues such as a grade review and that. So we'd like to see that report out there because there's a lot of work to be done on that.
Other unions?
Yes, I'll echo what Seamus has said. That there has been some engagement, but we certainly would like to see the report published as soon as possible.
Yourself, sir?
Obviously, in an information point, the more information that we have about the future is hugely important to members and staff.
It's disappointing to hear that that opportunity wasn't afforded you to engage with that level. That is extremely disappointing. As I said, I know Deputy Griffin asked a significant number of questions there and didn't get an opportunity to get answers coming from members of staff who couldn't be here, and that's something that I put forward at committee. I believe we as a committee should actually go out to RTE and give that opportunity of us meeting all the staff that couldn't be here today to allow their views put forward. And I think that would inform us better as committee members ahead of our report, and that's something that I'll be putting on the table.
You will be aware we did agree on the course of action, Senator.
Maybe I'll give the opportunity to answer the questions that Deputy Griffin asked with regard to Deborah Day's report.
Well, actually, I had answered. I think Deputy Griffin had temporarily left the room with them at that time. But one of the questions was who was involved, or how was it decided that was included? And my answer was that RTE appointed a company called Evershed Sutherland, and Evershed Sutherland was picked by RTE. They had terms of reference. They did what was called a desktop review. They set themselves up in RTE, and they had a checklist whereby they went through everyone within the organisation. We had no involvement in that. We did have an involvement in campaigning for an appeals process, and that's where the senior counsel came in. But a measure of the difficulty we had was that RTE sought to deny people the right to be accompanied by a trade union official at those appeals. And we secured the right of representation in relation to that. One of the difficulties we have had, and it relates to Deputy Munster's comments earlier, which surprised me a bit because she would have been aware of it, is that under competition law, and we have spent many years coming in here looking for the right to come that, it was an offence for trade unions to represent freelance workers. And in fact, a SIP2 official was threatened with jail on the steps of the court for doing that. So we didn't have a right to represent people. When RTE forced people to act as sole trader, anyone over 30,000 pays VAT. The implication of that is that nails down further their status as a sole trader and denies them access to the right of the Workplace Relations Commission and the right to representation. In relation to the figure that's been talked about, the 700 or whatever under scope, I think you really need to bring in RTE and to drill down that, because scope's determination includes anyone who actually might act as a contributor in RTE, including someone who is a sports commentator and happens to be an auctioneer or a bank manager, someone who makes something once or twice a week. They're in a very different position from the people who we represent. And I actually would like to see granular detail, and I would like to see RTE and Scope dealing with this as a matter of urgency. This can't allow to drag on for 10, 15 years. But I do think I'd like to see a greater examination of those figures that RTE are talking about. And I think it is absurd, to reiterate my point earlier, Senator, that the state broadcaster comes in crying poverty while simultaneously lining the pockets of lawyers. Doesn't make sense.
I would concur with Seamus. It would be the same for us all here, the same issue.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
Well, I'd hope that I'd actually get further answers from both the NUJ and SIPTU in relation, and rather than saying you concur, they're two separate organisations. I think I'd like to see a more detailed view on it.
Sorry, Senator, our view would be the same. The processes were conducted. We do a joint, with a joint group, as you know, in RTE, which is the trade union group. And we are a collaborative group that works together so that different workers aren't played off, different category of workers aren't played off each other. We do all kinds of negotiations together, different groups of people. So we have the same position when we come, that's what I refer to. We have the same position on this, with the same history of how things were resolved. If that is an answer for you, Senator.
I think one of the questions that Deputy Griffin asked too was regarding union subs that were charged over these years and yet weren't represented when this issue would.
I mean, if that's a question, that's probably, I think, for a different forum. I mean, we're talking here about the issues that were in RTE. I'm struggling to understand how did that fall under the remit we're in here for?
It's just that some workers feel that they were abandoned and they weren't properly supported with regard to this. Would you do anything different if you were doing it again? I suppose the best thing.
I don't, would you do anything different? I think the processes are difficult. Sorry, I was just making sure the light was on. In these kind of situations, and they have been all kinds of difficult situations over the years, not just in RTE, all over the place. It is a process that's gone through. It's a way of resolving. It was taken as approach from, I think, as far back it was, Seamus, was it 2001, that it would be to force this change in RTE to recognise, and it wasn't until after a very severe financial crisis, I think in 2011, 2012, that came about, and this process came and how to resolve it. It is an employer shouldn't resolve, and it's cross everywhere. It's not just in RTE. Bogus self-employment, as you've heard from my colleagues, is rife in construction. We fight it all the time, trying to resolve a process. What you try to get is the best solution for the most options for as many people as you can.
I am conscious, Brendan and Seamus were indicating, this session is about culture and governance of RTE and the future of media. So just to be conscious that this session is on that issue.
Yeah, thanks for letting us in. I've been trying to get in since Deputy Brendan Griffin made comments along with Deputy Munster. And I'm conscious of the fact that there's a bit of union bashing going on here, and I don't like it. I work closely with the NUJ over years. I've worked closely with SIPTU over the years. I've worked closely with all the unions Unite has, and every union gives 110% to their members and advise their members accordingly under the constraints of the Industrial Relations Acts. Now, if deputies and senators around this table and this forum thinks there's a deficit in regard to that representation, then strengthen the Industrial Relations Acts and strengthen the workers and how the unions can represent them workers. If that's the argument, then don't be grandstanding here.
No, I'm not grandstanding by any means, so I ask you to withdraw that comment.
I have the floor.
I have the floor. Hang on. I will allow, it's Deputy Carragher's set of questions that are there.
I have the floor.
Brendan Byrne is well, you're entitled to respond.
I'm finishing up now.
Okay.
I have the floor. I have the floor. I have the floor. Don't be grandstanding. Change the legislation. Tighten the legislation in regard to industrial relations. Help the workers. Help the unions to fight these employers that give bogus self-employment, that reduce our members and employees' terms and conditions. Give us the tools to do that, and you know better people will do it.
Yeah.
Withdraw the remark accusing me of grandstanding. I'm asking questions. which I'm entitled to do, and I'm asking you to give an answer. I'm not grandstanding. I'm asking questions that have been put forward by employees, which I'm entitled to do. There's no grandstanding going on here. We're asking questions like we've done ever since this started 12 months ago.
My impression of your questions was grandstanding, and I'm not withdrawing it.
Oh, okay, I'm going to move on. If you have a...
I saw that as a slight to myself as well. Can I just make the point that it is no wonder that some workers have come to us feeling abandoned if the very conveying of their testimonies in this committee is considered grandstanding. Because what I did here today, I came in and I gave a voice to people who have not felt represented,
okay.
who felt disenfranchised. And if you're dismissing that, well, it's easy to understand.
I'm sorry.
It's easy to understand how the workers feel.
I'm sorry, folks, and you have had, and there may be time to come back again. Senator Carrigy, if you have a final question, I'll allow it, or I'm going to move on. And next, because the substituted order is Fintan Warfield.
Chair. I wanted to talk, maybe spend 10 minutes talking about the future strategy and what that might mean for the media landscape, the audiovisual, film and TV landscape, I suppose the radio one as well. And I suppose if RTE cut 400 jobs and increase commissioning by 50%, what the reality would be for workers. Could you tell us what maybe the state of play is for workers in the independent sector? Do you represent any of those workers? Is there trade union membership amongst in that sector? And have we learned anything from, I suppose, the symphony orchestra being moved to the National Concert Hall and children's programming being outsourced as well?
In the independent sector, film and entertainment, you would have production companies of all kinds of different independent ones. There is trade union representation in it. They are a strong group, and they collectively negotiate or attempt to collectively negotiate with various different ones. They are scattered. It's not like you have a location where you can have 1,000 people working. And if you have 1,000 people working in film and entertainment, they're all over the country. And indeed, some people may be involved in productions outside of the country as part of the work they do. It is difficult. It is more of a, do people have a contract of indefinite duration? Not always. They're usually you're on a production. It's almost like you could, I suppose, look at like construction, where somebody is working on a building site for a period of time, may still work for the same employer but on a different building site. So you'd have different ones that are permanently employed by a production company and others who may not be. So it is an element of that. And your second question, I think the concern that the orchestras have is, I don't think people realise how valuable they are.
Concert orchestra?
Yeah, how they are valuable to us, where it's going. The Symphony Orchestra has found it was a very traumatic time, I think, for people to move, but it was done under TUPE, which gave some, security and guarantee around their terms and conditions of employment. I think it's a loss to RTE to lose it, but there was a reason to it. There is a concern that RTE would lose the concert orchestra, and that is a big concern, that it would lose it.
Is it fear? Is it grounded in anything?
I don't know. Well, as I said in the beginning, when I talked to my statement about how stuff went wildfire, I mean, there was people who worked in some of the radio stations that were afraid they were going to be outsourced. What did that mean? People asked me to explain TUPE to them. What did it mean? That's how it went in. As I said, Fair City, they thought that production was going to go. And that's the situation we're still in. Nobody has come along and said, this is where it's going to happen. Like a natural attrition they talk about, that's 168 over the 4 years to 2028. But where do, technically, the other 200 odd come from?
Is that why Fair City was rumoured to be outsourced or to the independent sector? Like, how many people work in Fair City?
Well, there's a lot of people. I don't know, between the actors, and there's a cast, and there's a base cast, you would say a core cast of 40 people, and then you have all the ancillary people that may work, but they also work in other parts of RTE. They wouldn't necessarily all the time be on it, you know, between producers are very much on a contract basis, or directors would be very much as well, so they come in and out and do it. But it was because people would see it and they felt it for a long time. It's an easy
Can I ask
target.
about the Fair City piece? I just had a question. So they have to go ahead from the executive producer to go on another gig. What happens during the 2 months that they're off in the summer? Will they still need to go to the executive producer for permission to do the gig?
Yeah, there's still a, I believe that's what it's, there's been no definition on it, they've just been advised, there'll be no filming. Regularly in you could go through a script process where you could be,
But in the 2 months, in July and August or
yeah,
August,
they could be
September,
asked, because there is,
they have to ask the executive
it
producer.
is, I don't, there is a logic behind it, which I don't want to refer why they would do it, but they do have to still, yeah, to be okayed. It has to be confirmed.
And in terms of, have we learned anything from children's? Like SIP2 seem more concerned. This idea of a hybrid model or a commissioning house.
Yeah.
Would I be right to suggest that SIP2 would be more worried about that, given the news might be kept in, it would always be kept in-house?
It may be, and I will defer to, I would understand why we're concerned about everything going out, of being, as we said before, smaller RTE, less people in there, less resources. I defer, Emma, you want to talk about that?
Just, I mean, the NUJ, while most of our membership is in news and current affairs, we also have members who are researchers, who are producers, who work in press, who work in comms. So we are stretched across the organisation. And also within news and current affairs, I would say, we're being told, oh, you'll be okay in news and current affairs, but we don't feel so safe. And like RTE is a big thing, and news and current affairs is anchored by a lot of what goes on around it, and there's an awful lot of creative cross-pollination. So even within news and current affairs, we're not looking out, you know, over the edge going, we're all right in our boat. Far from it, in fact. And what I want to say as well is we don't understand the rationale behind this cutting. We don't see what is this going to fix. You know, we're actually being driven, even after all the scandals of the summer, we've been driven further into the arms of commercial interests. And we just don't understand why that is happening. The only thing we can think of is that a crisis is being used to drive a pre-existing agenda through, and obviously we're opposed to that.
Yeah, Chair, just very briefly, first of all, I don't take any consolation from the fact that news and current affairs may be safer than anywhere else. Yeah. Public service broadcasting is a rich tapestry and or a jigsaw with all of the pieces relating. I'm as concerned about the future of the concert orchestra as Teresa is. And why stop at the concert orchestra? Why not abandon Irish language programming? Why worry about archives? So, you know, it is important that the public service broadcaster fulfills all of its remit. The very commercial values, and that's always like a contradiction in terms, it is, which brought us to our knees, the flip-flop mentality, the executive pay, the commercialisation and the private enterprise ethos. That is very antithesis of public service broadcasting. In terms of the industry, I'm going back in a way to Deputy Griffin and Deputy Carragher's comments. One of the issues that's relevant about the private sector is that they have scant regard for trade union recognition, and we don't have trade union recognition rights for collective bargaining in Ireland. That's why when you ask about the independent sector, I can't represent members in Virgin Media. They pay their money, but I'm not in the door. I'm not let in the door unless I want to go on a Tonight programme to criticise RTE. We're not allowed into Bauer Media. We're not recognised in most of the local radio stations in this country. So, and that's important. So it's easy to debate this in isolation of a much wider picture, and that's why I think that we need. I'd like that if there is to be an increase in independent public service broadcasting, great, we need that. If there's going to be outsourcing, then public procurement rules must apply, and we must ensure that people are not transferred out, or we'll be having a conversation in 10 years' time about bogus self-employment and other dodgy contracts. It'll just be under a different umbrella.
Can finally, maybe for Emma, I studied film and TV production in Galway. It always seemed a bit of a pipe dream to get into RTE from college, Would you have a vision for young people, an RTE where young people could come in at an entry level? It never seems to be, it seems very difficult an organisation to get into. Would you share that impression?
Yes, I would, and I feel so sorry but I don't want to sound too negative either. I really don't want to put people off wanting to come into RTE. So that question actually really tears me, because when I came into the organisation, it was a very different place, and it was an amazing thing to get in the door and to be offered after 1 year a permanent job. And it's so different now, and I speak to so many talented younger colleagues who are really struggling, who are really stressed with really, really, really difficult shift patterns, and lots of other real problems. I see the pay is very low, I have to say. So I really feel concerned for them. And over the summer, I thought for the first time, and this was a terrible thing, but I suddenly felt, I don't know, would I recommend to anyone to come into RTE? And that was a very shocking thing for me to feel, because up until that point, I would always have said, go for it. But actually here I want to reverse that, and I want to say, RTE needs young talent. It may be hard to get in, it may be a struggle once you get in. Your ideas mightn't be taken on board. You mightn't feel, but I really want all those people to please keep coming, and we need young people, and certainly your colleagues, we really value young people, and we want them in the organisation.
Thanks, Emma. Cheers, folks. Thanks.
Thank you. I will offer the panel if we want. I'm very conscious we've been nearly 2 hours here. If you want a 5-minute comfort break, or are you happy to? You're happy to proceed? Okay. Our next two questioners are Senator Shane Castles and then Deputy Matty McGrath.
Thanks very much, Ciarán, and welcome to all the witnesses. Emma, I might just start with yourself in respect of the job losses. You made reference to that in your opening statement. In November of last year, when the bailout deal was announced for RTE of some 56 million, in 2 tranches, 16 million last year, 40 million this year, that will be paid after the governance reports are published. The next day after that bailout deal, the strategic vision plan announcing the 400 job cuts were announced. Now, you have said in your opening statement that the deal seems to be that in return for some movement on funding, RTE must cut its workforce by 1/5. Can I ask you, do you feel that the deal was contingent on job losses? Are you making the assertion in that statement that there was a deal between Minister Martin and Kevin Backhurst that job losses had to be on the table, and 24 hours previous, the 56 million was announced for RTE?
I mean, I don't know how formal a deal is or was, but I'm
only picking you up, Emma, just I don't want to cut across. You've used the adjective, it seems to be.
Yeah.
So you're alluding to it. And I prefer if we're all straight. Are you saying that RTE is a gun to its head by government, and that they were told, unless you cut 1/5 of the workforce, you're not getting the bailout for 56 million?
Okay, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I don't know. But as I said, it seems to me that is a quid pro quo. And it's not just November, it's now as well. We're waiting. We're waiting for two things. We're waiting for further short-term funding. We're also waiting for a long-term solution to our funding issue. And I feel, and it seems to me, that all that is contingent on RTE delivering cuts. And I don't see any connection.
Okay, so in the context of, because it's been discussed by the unions here, that the job losses are going to have an impact on quality of production. So can I ask, has the union, either yourself or Seamus, put that to RTE, that the government sought job losses in return for a near 60 million bailout?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's certainly that this would have been aired at certainly at town hall meetings, I feel. But I actually just can't remember if we did in direct meetings.
I mean, what we do know, Senator, is that RTE was promised 40 million. We do know that that was contingent on the publication of reports which were due at the end of January, and we now know that they will not be available before May. And we know that as a result of that, there is a distinct possibility that you and current affairs, the area that I know best, will not be able to meet its remit. That's what we know for certainty.
Okay, and in respect to that, Seamus, because do you feel that Kevin Backhurst was forced into this position of cuts, and in respect of where those cuts are being made, the impact on RTE?
Yeah. I'm not going to personalise this into individual Director General, but the reality is that as a result of a crisis not of our making as staff, government has made a decision that further money to RTE will be contingent on change. That's a fact. So if you and therefore I don't think that the Director General or the Executive Board or interim leadership, or whatever they call themselves these days, had any option but to say yes, we will introduce change, and change is needed. Well, you won't get any argument from us. The problem I have is that I think that in fact, I know that the report that was published, the strategy, is not the strategy that would have been published if there was not a gun to the head, because there would have been greater consultation, there would have been much more engagement with staff, I hope. Remember, we heard about this in a media leak. So I do think there's a gun to the head, and the government has made that decision, and it's a political decision, and I understand why they want reform. What we're saying is that we have real concerns that in achieving those reforms, the best interests of the Irish people are not being served.
Okay, so on that, just parking aside whether someone holds a full-time employee or whether they're good, because RTE have committed to actually obviously increasing independent production, and that they would say that they are safeguarding the entity that is RTE, and that from the consumer's point of view who watch this and don't know whether someone is in a full-time contract or a part of independent production, that the actual future of RTE is going to be safeguarded. Would you accept that?
I don't. I think if you look at what the function of public service broadcasting is, it is to nurture talent. And I believe talent is best nurtured when you have quality employment, quality journalism, and where workers are treated with respect and dignity.
Okay.
And I'm not convinced that in all of the areas where outsourcing may occur that we can guarantee that in a way that we can in public service broadcasting. Okay. I also think that in the same way as I would have had concerns when the Abbey decided to get rid of their workshop, that the original remit of RTE as a nurturer of talent is undermined, in the same way as you can argue that children didn't notice any difference when the children's department was closed. But I think that the failure of the public service broadcaster to make its own children's programme, to have scripts written in English and Irish by Irish writers, I think that's a failure.
In terms of, and you've made the point in terms of this need for commercialisation then infiltrates the modus operandi of RTE, how you get into positions like this, and that a purely publicly funded model would kind of alleviate this. I would make the contention in terms of high pay or whatever. You look at BBC, they've had many of these governance issues. They still have a scenario of overpaid presenters where you can see Gary Lineker being paid £1.5 million sterling to present Match of the Day. So in terms of the reality of whether it is a fully publicly funded model or a hybrid model, would you accept that contention that BBC find themselves just in the same scenarios and they're a fully publicly funded model?
I have never understood the fetish of big pay for big names, and particularly in a market where there is very little option to go anywhere else. And you know, because I'm very publicly on the record saying this, that RTE was effectively auctioning against itself, playing games with an agent on behalf of their bigger names. That was absurd.
So the threat by RTE, big presenters, that they could go elsewhere, you don't buy that?
Well, I can tell you that there was one presenter who threatened so often to leave that we actually said, well, just show him the door. They did show him the door and they engaged someone else and their ratings increased, and that has happened consistently. There is plenty of talent, and you know, at the end of the day, this is a small country. The notion of the media market existing in that format, I think there has been, and in fairness, I think the current Director General has had a much better approach in relation to that.
Okay, Teresa, you touched in your report about the job losses as well and the impact on that. Can I ask, in terms of that choice, because it seems to be from the technical point of view a choice this summer between sport and drama, and instead of Kazakhstan it's Paris and Berlin, do you feel that that's the thin end of the wedge, that there's going to be further impact in other departments?
Yes, Senator, the problem we have is, as I said before, this RTE has a remit for drama, and you know, to create drama that's employing local talent, be it in front or behind the screen or the camera might in it is important. Do they view that the big sporting occasions have more of a commercial play or draw on it? That is a problem when you're weighing one or the other. It goes back to what we say about the funding of RTE. It is a public service broadcaster. There's this huge push towards commercialisation. That's why we see the threat of outsourcing jobs, directly employed jobs, to put them out there, and it's put under this myth that, oh, it's more creative to do it. There's a huge amount of creative talent in the independent sector. There is, of course, but it's a way of commercialising what we say, and it's something you've had this belief for a long time, and a lot of our members have, that we fear there's a privatisation of RTE going on, and it might be going on by stealth. It wouldn't be the first commercial entity that's is either semi-state or part of this government that has happened. And they have never ended well for the people of this country. They've ended well for any kind of investor or hedge fund manager, but never. We have lost out, and we shouldn't be here today not trying to protect RTE as a public service broadcaster and what it brings to our art and our culture, our news and our information, our democracy and our society. We shouldn't be selling it for the highest bidder. In your opening statement, you referred to the fact that the voice of the staff had been missing from the discussions. One other voice that has been missing from these discussions is obviously the former DG, D. Forbes. Do you feel that there will be ever a resolution to the piece of work that's being done here in terms of overall governance, that voice is not heard in these discussions either?
I mean, we would all love for D. Forbes to come before this committee or the PAC to answer questions. We absolutely would be very keen to see that happen, and I agree with you, there's a missing link there. So we would love to see her, as I say, appear before a committee.
Okay, thanks very much, Cahirla. Can I just finally acknowledge in the gallery the presence of one of the voices of many of our youths, Brian Carty, who was the voice of many championship summers and a real asset to broadcasting in this country. And I think the manner in which he was treated by the state broadcaster was also disgraceful, and he has done this, the profession of journalism a great service.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, Deputy Matty McGrath.
I want to issue a fair fraud in the Gach enough. I want to welcome you all and thank you for coming. I probably was hoping for and expected a different response, but look, nonetheless, I believe you're doing your best. And it's a messy situation, and the old saying, something rotten in the state of Denmark or something rotten out in Montrose, and very rotten. And I've been quite straightforward and blunt in my questions all the time, but I mean, I don't know. Like, there was 1,396 workers let go after Evershed's Sutherland's report. On the figures given by the Taoiseach, 297 of those workers would have been employees at the time. They were dismissed. And what steps at the TUG taken to recoup what was stolen from those 297 RTE employees?
The trade union group, or indeed individual unions, will represent members who come to us and seek representation. That's what we do, Deputy McGrath. I have represented members who secured employment. I have represented members who secure retrospection. SIPTU have done the same, and we will continue to do the same.
But that's an astounding amount of 297, you know, and they were treated appallingly, literally dismissed. And RTE reclassified employees have been forced into yellow pack contracts where terms and conditions are far less than if they had been legally classified as employees in the first instance. And how can you, Eoghan, stand over such contracts?
I will again, Chair, suggest that it is appropriate that these are questions directed to the employer. The TUG has not entered into agreements on individual contracts. We don't have that power. These are contracts because this is not a collective process. What we agreed was a process. There was a review. There were contracts there was an appeals process, as I said earlier, chaired by a senior counsel. There was another process in relation to retrospection, and anyone who was not happy with that outcome is free to go to a third party. We are extremely unhappy, not just with this process, but with the whole way in which RTE subsequently has responded to positive scope determinations. But what I am surprised at is the apparent belief on the part of some members of this committee that we have extraordinary powers as trade union representatives. We are limited by the law of the land. We are limited by what the law allows us to do, and we are limited by contracts. So this notion that somehow we have sat back, we haven't done that. And there are cases ongoing, and we don't comment on individual cases. There are cases ongoing. Equally, and I've said it earlier, that when you look at those large figures, there were people who were offered contracts and declined them. So when you talk about the decline, you know, people being let go, remember there were some people, a small number, but there are some people who didn't want to be an employee, who actually preferred a contract for service, for whatever reason. So within that, there are people, so it's not that they were all dismissed, some people would actually have decided that they actually wanted to go. Equally, RTE are wrong in suggesting that people would have chosen a contract for service, because the reality is they had no choice. So this is extraordinarily complex, and I think what would be useful for the committee is to hear from the decision makers who offered those contracts.
Could you give a percentage of what numbers you think there of those 297 that might have decided themselves that they didn't want?
No, I don't have that, because one of the issues which you have to realise is that as trade unions, when we were dealing with the Evershed process, we actually were dealing that with our hands behind our back, because we didn't have a list of people who were on bogus self-employed contracts. We have no access to that information. The only time that we, as unions, knew who was on that list is if people came to us individually. Many people on those lists actually may not be union members at all. By definition, some of them would have had contact with us. I will stand over how we represent people who approached us, but some of them would not have approached us, and RTE felt that they were unable, under the Data Protection Act, to give us lists. And equally, we do not know who was covered by the Evershed process. In other words, we don't have the list, because Evershed was an independent legal review. They produced the names, RTE is the contract.
And the way you're talking, you think there's two silos. You're working in a silo that you didn't know what was going on, like a big wall between you and the management. Did you not have representation on the board? It's staff.
I never used the word silo. That's your word. Yeah. I said that in relation to this process, RTE were bound by, or Troop Health have bound by data protection. There is an elected board member, of course, but they don't deal with, no more than this committee, they don't deal with day-to-day HR issues. But the issue of bogus self-employment was consistently raised at board level over many, many years by a number of members of the RTE authority, including Patricia King during her tenure on it. This is an issue that goes back over many, many years. It has come to focus now, and I'm glad it has, but this isn't a new issue.
Could I ask then, I'm sure you're aware that misclassification of workers as bogus self-employed is a criminal offence under the Social Welfare Consolidation Act 2005. Were you aware of that, or are you aware of that?
I see you read the same tweets as me.
Excuse me.
The reality...
I don't read any tweets. I never tweeted in my life, so if you want to be acting to tweet now, you can, but I never tweeted. I didn't read any tweets.
I am clearly...
I'm not told what to say either by anybody.
I am clearly aware, and all trade union officials are aware of the law of the land. And in fact, that is why we insisted that there should be an appeal in relation to misclassification for people who felt that they should be classified. And that's why we accepted the nomination of Peter Ward, Senior Counsel, who I think probably was aware that misclassification is illegal.
But I mean, an appeal process, surely you should be jumping up and down looking for prosecutions. The law has been flouted hundreds and thousands of times on an ongoing basis. And you want to be part of that institution and are part of it. I've said from the outset is the fraud squad should be brought into RTE and CAB, and it most certainly is. Why aren't you looking for the fraud squad to be brought in to where the 2005 Consolidation Act has been broken, continually broken?
In my experience, Deputy, jumping up and down gets headlines, but in industrial relations it doesn't actually.
You haven't got up at all. You have to say plenty. And I'm hearing you often on radio, and I had more respect for you than I have today because you're being smart. Why? You have a responsibility to the Yellow Pack workers, and you're not the only union throughout the public service that have allowed Yellow Pack workers to be introduced everywhere. Made cosy deals because you deal with governments and departments, and to help with the Dina Bioga, the small people. So I'm asking you now, what action did you take to secure and ensure that the Gardaí investigated it? It's illegality at a large scale. It's disgusting. I'm as an employer, if I did it, I'd be frozen by the revenue and I'd be in jail if I didn't pay the money. RTE have told us they had 50 million away in contingency fund to deal with revenue. That is illegal. No other employer in the country gets that kind of preference. So it's time there was a big shake-up out there, both union side and the cabal that run it, because you're all part of the same cabal as far as I'm concerned. What did you do? What did you do about having those people prosecuted? The powers that be?
Deputy, I do. Sorry, Deputy. I just I'm very conscious in this that everyone has a right to fair process.
Of course.
And if I want us to focus on some of the evidence, the facts where there are allegations of criminal wrongdoing.
Yes, it is criminal.
You just those views that you're expressed, they're your own views, not those of the committee.
Oh, I mean, they've accepted. I think Mr. Dooley has accepted that that it wasn't right. It's not right.
Well,
under the 2005 Consolidation Act, it's a criminal offence to have
I appreciate you're making an allegation, but there's a process there that just needs to be followed. And I'm just asking you to be careful in your questioning.
That's why I'm asking the good people here, what action are they taking, strenuous action, to represent the people who have been misclassified by their employer and been punished, and the Yellow Pack workers that were trucked out the door. He said some weren't trade union reps. He couldn't tell me how many went voluntary. So there's a lot of work to be done out there on your side as well. So I'm asking, what action have you taken? Anybody can answer.
Definitely. Just
demanding that this issue be investigated. But for the whistleblower, we wouldn't know anything about it.
Well, Deputy, if you don't know about it, it's just simply because you haven't been following it. And at the earlier stage of this hearing, I outlined the fact that 20 years ago, we were responsible for a review conducted by good bodies which ended the process of bogus self-employment. That then crept in again, and we raised it, and the trade union movement raised it through the social partnership, not just in the context of RTE, but bogus self-employment is, I have no problem. One of the issues that we raised was the failure of government consistently to provide sufficient resources to scope, to go out into media organisations, to go out onto building sites. Scope are grossly underfunded, and we raised that. The current issue was first raised by the trade union group in 2007, 2008. We'd been raising that consistently. And on the 31st of January 2019, I raised it in this room. This is an issue that we have been dealing with consistently. We have been, the Evershed review directly arose as a result of trade union group. The Director General of RTE herself has admitted and said in evidence to this committee when she was turning up that actually the first meeting she attended with the trade union group, the first item on the agenda was bogus self-employment. The first meeting that the director of HR turned up at, the first item on the agenda was bogus self-employment.
And why is there has there been no prosecution, so? Why is the law been flouted openly? And I've seen RTE investigations, and I admire a lot of the work they do, but I've seen them go down to Tipperary and punish a decent company and mislead and put a secret camera into something and totally blackguard a businessman who's now since dead. And you can do all this in the name of honesty and transparency and wrong that company, grievously wrong them, but they've no comeback. Once it goes out there on national TV, you know, you can't kill a lie. And it was like, but you want to do that to you want to be judge of other business people and other people out there, but yet this rotten system continues. And I call it rotten and I mean rotten. That's what it is.
I think you might not be aware that Philip Boucher Hayes actually did a series on drive time and on bogus self-employment. One programme in particular.
Talking about it within RTE.
Yes, absolutely, that is RTE. It's on
He's an insider. He works for RTE. That answers my question. The cat is minding the cream. Well, for God's sake, he's an insider.
The point I was making.
Do you have a final question, Deputy McGrath?
I do. In desperation, it's time that this golden circle was cracked and shattered for once and for all. And sadly, you're a big part of it, the unions, not the workers. I meet most decent people out there when I'm left in there, very seldom, ordinary people, and I'm very fond of them and good workers, and their jobs need to be protected. But you're part of the system, and you're happy to be part of the system, and you've done nothing about it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Deputy McGrath. It falls to me, but I'm actually going to allow, there are two non-members of the committee here, but I will allow them to make brief interventions. So I'm going to call on Senator Tom Clonan and then Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett. Tom.
I just have a couple of very brief questions for you. I just have to declare a conflict of interest, Chair. I am a member of the NUJ and I have been for 23 years. And I have had issues which were very well dealt with by the Secretary General, Seamus Dooley here. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I suppose the other conflict of interest I would have is that I've been in and out of RTE for 24 years as a security analyst. Less so recently, for whatever reason. And I have found all of the staff that I've met in Montrose to be extremely hard-working. And, you know, sometimes when I drive through the UK, which is a population of over 60 million, which supports the BBC, you know, when you listen to the standard of broadcasting and television output in the UK, it's extraordinary what is produced here. It's something, you know, I think the quality of public service broadcasting here is of a very, very high standard. And it issues, I think as a public service broadcaster, you've highlighted many of the issues that brought me into this institution and continue to do so unfailingly. My question, you know, really about the culture and the governance of RTE. I mean, I've been a public servant for since 1987. And one of the things about the disbursement of public funds is the absolute perception of fairness. But over the summer and in the committee hearings in relation to RTE, what strikes me is it's the shocking levels of unfairness in RTE, the different categories and classifications of workers. So there's been a lot of mention of the bogus contracts here, but I wanted to ask a very specific question about equal pay for equal work, which is a fundamental trade union principle. So I'm conscious that in RTE there are categories of workers who earn far in excess of their colleagues. For some of them are on contracts, some of them are employees. When presenters who are paid very high salaries on contract, when they take a break and they're replaced by another presenter, is the replacement presenter paid the same amount of money? Now, I'd be very concerned about this because in a number of cases, and this is not a criticism of the presenters, it's a question about management's disbursement of funds. So I know in many cases you'll have a male presenter who's very highly paid, who when they take a break or go on leave or whatever it is they do, they're replaced by a female presenter. Is that female presenter paid exactly the same, like pay for like work? And in other cases, it may be a female presenter who's on a contract who's replaced by a male presenter. Because I think when it comes to disbursement of public funds, I think it's very important that there's that parity in terms of pay.
Thank you, Senator Clonan. I can answer that question on the paid thing. If a colleague of mine in the newsroom steps up and goes to present a flagship programme on air, they are paid an extra €20 before tax for doing that. That's what I'm told. So that's what they get. They get an extra €20 before tax for stepping up to do that.
Senator, the issue you have raised is one of the issues that we raised with the expert group on HR, and we spent a considerable amount of time on that. And I am hoping that some of the issues you raised, which I would share your concern, are addressed. It is deeply disturbing, and it is and in fact, one of the big failures of the Evershed review process was that RTE didn't include within the review so-called on-air talent. They don't use the phrase talent anymore, but it is. You're right. It is. There's no justification for it, and public service broadcaster should set the gold standard, and in holding everyone else to account, they need to do that.
And just finally, I mean, do you have the means? I mean, I've learned a lot in just the short time I've sat in here in terms of the extent to which you can represent your members. But is that not something that you can ballot for industrial action? Or, I mean, so if I go to another part of the public service where I worked in DIT, now TU Dublin, for 22 years. Now, if I was asked to do the work of another lecturer but not get paid, I would just refuse to do it. I mean, are there any means by which this practice can be changed? I mean, I'm thinking a number of years ago, there was a flagship fashion programme on RTE, and it emerged that the male and female presenter, both very high-profile people, were being paid differently. And I think there was an attempt on the part of those presenters. They took action themselves to ensure that they were both paid the same amount. I mean, do you have any means by which that... it's an absolute fundamental principle of work, and particularly work that's funded by the Exchequer, that there's equal pay. Do you have any remedy at your disposal? Can your members say, look, I can't do this because I'm not being paid the proper amount, or can you take industrial action, or can you ballot for industrial action on that?
It's a really difficult issue. I mean, I've had cases of women coming to me and saying, look, you know, I'm only being paid this amount, and I've just discovered that my colleague, who's male and less experienced than me, is being paid, has been brought in much higher up on the scale. And we certainly on the shop floor, we really try to pursue those cases. But those workers are at the same time perhaps on a temporary contract, not secure, and they have an eye to their future. They don't want to rock the boat too much. You know, if you talk about people stepping up to present programmes, people want those opportunities. So we do our best, but it's a real struggle, and it's very hard, and it's a very complicated picture. It's not as simple as saying we'll all ballot, because there are lots of different factors feeding into this, the individual circumstances of people. So it is a really tough, and we on the gender pay issue, we've been railing against this for years, and we got nowhere. Also on the top pay, like in 2019, we met as a branch, and we agreed that there should be a cap placed on top earnings in RTE. That got very little traction outside of RTE. You know, so we've been trying to fight this, and we've been railing against it. We didn't get very far, and our hope over the summer was that would be, everything that happened over the summer would be a catalyst for real change, and so far we haven't seen that.
Just Senator, I asked the question about balloting. For a lot of these cases you're talking about equal pay, the Equality Act, and how that would cover. The difficulty you have in some of this equal pay for equal work, if it's an individual contract, which can happen with some on-screen positions, it is a lot easier to bring an individual employment case for a member for equal pay when we have a grading structure and a pay scale that is particular in, we'd say, some of the more operational ones. And there are also, under these kind of individual cases, there, as we've explained here before, the limitations of the Industrial Relations Act 1990, where people would do some industrial action, as you talked about, what is classed as a trade dispute. I would find myself in some of the more public sector ones, because they're very strictly graded, even as you talk, people are very strict to hold on to it and don't do it. when there's a difficulty. But as Emma has outlined, and we have found it, when people join and come in, and they're coming in a temporary contract, it's the future of getting future employment. They don't want to rock the boat. A lot of the stuff we can hear in the TUG is people that have been there for a few years, and they're concerned, will it get me? I don't want to raise my... I've been in a situation where people don't want to talk on the media about what it's like to work in RTE. Sure. Okay.
Chair, just one very brief. Pay transparency is essential to all of this, but the other opportunity, and I hope that it will be dealt with in the review group, is that we need to get rid of the cult of personality and the notion that editors and director generals have the divine right of kings. And there needs to be an opportunity for everyone to apply for the opportunity to go on air. There needs to be open and transparent processes of recruitment. And it's the absence of that that leads to the kind of secrecy around individual pay.
Yeah. Could I just conclude, Chair? I want to, in my questioning, there's no implied criticism whatsoever of any of those presenters. And like I said, I think the product that is generated is of a really, really high standard. But I think that's a failure of management. It's a failure of leadership. And unfortunately, as was pointed out by members of the committee, some of those people have not made themselves available to the committee, but particularly with public funding. I think that's a built-in programmed unfairness, and I'm very, very sorry to hear that, because your job is difficult enough without that culture of unfairness. Thank you.
Yeah, right from the outset, I felt that the worst possible thing that could happen is in the RTE scandal is that a small number of ridiculously paid executives and a small number of ridiculously paid presenters, and the lack of governance around those things were going to lead to ordinary workers losing out. Workers who had no responsibility for the malgovernance and, frankly, the greed of a small number at the top. And my concern, and I'd just be interested to hear from you on this, is that worst scenario is actually unfolding. Because of course it was the people at the top who decided to misclassify workers. It was the bosses in RTE misclassified workers, I think, because that's who does it, and they do it in the private sector and they do it in the public sector. And I've been campaigning against bogus self-employment for very many years. And like the way I view it, there's been some criticism obviously of the unions here, and I think, to be honest, the unions at times should be fighting harder against bogus self-employment, I will say that. But the people who misclassify are the bosses. The people who fund RTE, the government, should make sure that the bosses that they fund don't break the law and don't misclassify workers. And I'd like to hear from you about where you think they have failed in that regard, because I think it's outrageous that in a publicly funded body that the government have failed to see what is absolutely obvious, because there's an objective test. It's the control test. Are you an employee or are you a contractor? And it's obvious in the vast majority of cases, these people had all the attributes of employees. They should have been classified as employees. It was breaking the law not classifying them as employees, and it was designed in order to not give them their rights and entitlements and all the rest of it, which they now should have. And they're absolutely right, it seems to me, and I hope you agree, that they are enraged they were denied them. They should get them. And the question of them getting their retrospective entitlements should not then be used as an excuse to threaten the future existence of RTE. Because, and this, again, just tell me if I'm right or wrong, because the way I look at it is if jobs are suppressed in RTE, then they will be outsourced to a sector where you've no chance of getting a contract of indefinite duration. None at all. I mean, I'm going to the WRC this Friday with workers in the film sector who have been blacklisted out of the sector because they asked for contracts of indefinite duration, even though they've worked in that sector for 20 and 30 years. So the one thing that is obvious to me, it might be bad in RTE where there's people misclassified, but you go out to the independent sector, so-called, and you don't have any chance of ever having a job, which would be far worse, far worse. So, there's, you know, is that a reasonable, because I think that's the thing that has to be emphasised, is that we have this situation, and indeed I think something needs to be done. I'd be interested in your comments about what is happening in that sector, because from what I understand, not a single worker of the sort that now those jobs may be suppressed in RTE, their equivalents working in the independent TV sector or the audiovisual sector, none of them at all have contracts of indefinite duration. Nobody, which is absolutely shocking, even though they've worked for that industry for decades.
Well, yes, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, a lot of it, because, I mean, however hard it is to police employment in RTE, and it's been really hard, it's much, much harder if you're talking about the private sector. And that's what we're facing. And you spoke about the summer, and our worst fears are being brought to pass, because we were hoping that this would be a catalyst for positive change, but it's a case of using a crisis to drive through another agenda. And even though there is absolutely no connection between the size of RTE and ordinary staff in RTE, ordinary workers in RTE, we are the ones who are bearing the brunt, it seems, of the scandals that we heard about over the summer. And we're seeing the workforce cut by 1/5. And as you say, and I said it earlier, that is work that is now going to be outsourced to the private sector. And I was contacted by people in the private sector since June, and I looked back at some of the texts I got, and one of them, a person I know from years back, spoke about the stress and insecurity of working in the private sector, going from gig to gig, and he said that by your 40s you're worn down. And as you said, you have no contract, no nothing. So yeah, we don't, like, the questions I'd like to ask is, why is RTE being cut? And I'd say this to politicians, like, why is this decision being taken to cut the RTE workforce by 1/5? I have not seen any rationale for that. Why do programmes have to be privatised wholesale now, or whole parts of the entertainment has been emptied out at the moment, TV entertainment. There was plans for a Saturday night show, those plans have now been shelved. It's all been hollowed out to be privatised. We don't know why this is happening. We've seen no rationale. Just seems to be a question of if you say something enough, it becomes a truth or an accepted thing that just has to happen, and we don't understand why.
I agree with you there. I think we're all led to believe on that outsourcing in private sector is best in everything. We see it, you see it, people talk about the health service would be great if we had some big business mogul in here and running it like a business. I think outsourcing is a way to move figures around on a balance sheet, and it helps the share price, it helps nothing else. There is the concern in the industry of all that talent going out and being out there. In all, I suppose in history, if we look, when any big high-level chief executives or management make decisions or companies go wrong, think of all the scandals across the world, it's always the ordinary worker on the bottom that pays. And that is the belief here again. I believe there is a responsibility in our government and in every department on looking at every contract and every process with whatever. Has to be a governance that it is being done correctly. What is the rationale? The rationale shouldn't be just for a commercial basis to sell out jobs or get rid of jobs. We believe that RTE has a very important part in our society. It has a cultural and is an artistic part in it. And to see those jobs being downgraded and the possibility of a future being downgraded is incomprehensible. But it does seem that this is the way to privatise. We believe this has been, I don't want to say it's a big Machiavellian thing going on behind it, but it's very hard not to believe there's somewhere out there wants to privatise RTE, sell it off to the highest bidder.
Okay. Does anyone else else wants to comment?
Just very briefly on the issue of contracts. There has correctly and understandably been a focus on bogus employment, and I do acknowledge, Deputy Barrett, your support on that issue, and also over many years on the related issue of the rights of freelancers to be represented in the Reform of Competition Law. But it's not just bogus employment. It's also a use of casual irregular contracts, of sole trader contracts, and the notion that some people can set themselves up as companies or have agents and be treated in a different way. I see all of those as being part of a piece. I'm a firm believer in the concept of people having contracts of service, of having reasonable but not extravagant pay. And I think that that's a way in which we ensure that people pay their taxes as well and that the state benefits. And I think all of these other schemes are designed in different ways to deny people of their rights, and they have many, many consequences. And I think that I really do look forward to the HR review, because that allows us, both in terms of what it says, but it also allows us to have an informed and focused discussion on why it is that we have this variety of things. And when you ask it, it's because that's the nature of the industry. It's kind of that stardust. I think we need an examination of that.
Okay, thank you. It then falls to me, and I suppose just to thank, I know our witnesses have been here for quite a while. I do want to say there can always be criticism of any organisation, but on the policy side, can I certainly say that I've always found the trade unions, in terms of informing us, to be very generous with your time and with the information. And I think, and it comes back to Richard's point, I think that if there is ire to be directed around who originally signed up, it's whoever designs these contracts in the first place. That's where the bulk of the ire, I think, needs to be directed. And I do appreciate the difficulties that you have faced as trade union advocates dealing with those. I would also say, and I appreciate you didn't say this, there's a lot of good work that is also done in the independent production sector, and I think it is important that is acknowledged. I want to just come to something, Teresa, that you mentioned, which is obviously with regard to equity being part of SIP2, and we're talking here about the future, and we talked about the impact of artificial intelligence on particularly in terms of on productions, but on actors, but it will impact and if others want to come in as well, and you'll be aware obviously of the disputes involving the Screen Actors Guild and the Screenwriters Guild in the US. What consideration has been given to that in terms of its impact that it's going to have on employment within the sector?
The sector itself, and we are part of FIA, which is the Federation of International Acting. There is a huge concern. We've been very supportive of our colleagues in SAG-AFTRA and their dispute over it, of what it does mean. There's actually the President of Irish Equity is attending a seminar in Europe, somewhere in Europe shortly about it. So there is huge concern of what it would mean on it, because there is a difficulty for actors, particularly in this country, and how stuff, different agreements are transposed about, like, what is, you've got what you would call your talent you're bringing onto the screen, and what is that? The residuals actors would get into the future. If something is shown. I saw a thing where some guy that played the Charlie Bucket in the original Willy Wonka still gets $500 a year for the residuals, and how many years that is. But that's important for a lot of actors because of the precariousness of the work. You can work for a lot of time. Not everybody is a Cillian Murphy, especially in a small country we're in. So the residuals are very important. There's been huge pressure by production companies in this country to get people to sign away that residual, which is an income gone. And then there's the problem that if artificial intelligence becomes the norm, what that would do to their income. So we would follow particularly what they're doing, and same issue. That's the concern.
Could you envisage therefore a future episode of Fair City being written by AI, and perhaps some of the actors being voiced or indeed acted by AI?
I could envisage people attempting it, but I would say with my trade union hat on, not actors' equity would not allow that to happen in this country. They will fight it tooth and nail. They're a very determined group of of individuals, and I can understand why they wouldn't. I'm not saying, but we do not want that. This is art, you know. We shouldn't dismiss art to be something, just a few pixels on a screen. We're talking about people who can bring to life and make us cry, make us laugh. They bring the written word onto the screen, and we shouldn't lose that.
I'm agreeing with you. I don't think AI can ever substitute for creativity, and it's critical. But certainly, and maybe on some of the more technical side, obviously technology is going to be working in conjunction with human technical experts. So I don't know if John.
As a group, we've always engaged with technology. Certainly from when I was an apprentice electrician until now, technology has changed massively. You know, homes have become way more automated, and what people are watching television on has completely changed. No longer is it the TV on the wall, it's the smartphone, it's on the move, it's the snippets, it's on social media platforms. So I think we've engaged with that, especially in RTE across the years. In the time that I've been there, we've gone from 4:3 to widescreen, to online, to satellite, to all those various different platforms. And I think most workers in there have an appetite to engage with that technology going forward. And that would include AI, but obviously not at the expense of good, well-paying jobs.
Okay, Seamus.
I think this also has huge relevance in terms of journalism and staffing and editorial resourcing, because what we are going to need is greater fact-checking, you know, the greater emphasis on tackling misinformation and disinformation. And AI has great potential in terms of analysis, in terms of statistical analysis, but it also requires a huge amount of vigilance. And we've seen examples of false stories already. So I think that actually it is something which has to be, you know, factored into in terms of, so I know that a number of media organisations have said, yeah, in the future we're going to use AI. What they haven't done is told us what they're going to do.
Okay. Well, I might ask Emma, because Emma specifically mentioned, and understandably politicians are interested in elections, and we have a number of them coming up over the next 12 months, and you mentioned the concern around disinformation. Do you see AI being used within the newsroom, particularly to be able to combat disinformation, but also, you know, how prepared do you think the RTE newsroom is in terms of being able to tackle disinformation, or if a deep fake emerged in the middle of a general election campaign?
Okay, now, I haven't considered the issue of AI in terms of its use in tackling disinformation, so that's the first thing, or being used in that way. I haven't considered that at all. It's a prospect. I just want to say one thing on the technology thing, that beyond AI technology, RTE needs to invest in technology. RTE needs to be properly funded to invest in technology, the technology that it needs to do a better job. That's the first thing in terms of resourcing. And in terms of my point on the upcoming elections, and my point was that some of my colleagues are really fearful of how we will be able to address, as you said, the issues that are going to arise for the very first time in the coming elections compared to previous elections. There's going to be disinformation. There's going to be claims made that like never before that will need to be fact checked. So I said this already, but it's even resourcing a lot of the time is just people. We need bodies on the ground. We will need experienced journalists who will be able to purely focus on fact-checking, because there are going to be a lot of, and you talked about a deep fake, but that's perfectly possible. You know, something like that. Like, we're concerned that with the level of resourcing we have currently, we are absolutely stretched to breaking point already. We're looking at the big challenges and new challenges that we're facing into over a series of, you know, very important elections coming up, and we're very concerned as to how we will rise to our public service mandate in terms of reporting accurately and fairly, given all those new challenges. That's as much as I can say, because it's such new ground for us.
Okay. I was very conscious of the opening question from my colleague Chris O'Sullivan was talking about the last 12 months and how difficult they have been, and we would certainly express solidarity with a lot of the workers at RTE. Could I ask maybe to be, if we can be optimistic, to look at the end of this 12-month process, when we are through all of the reports? I welcome by the fact that all of the unions have indicated your support for a publicly funded model coming from the Exchequer. I'm assuming handled through Commission Amman, an arm's length body, and you might want to talk about this. But where in 12 months' time, when we get through all of this, because it is critical still for our democracy that we have a strong RTE, where do you see us?
Yeah, I hope we're not still waiting for expert reports, which is what happened. The Future Media Commission was a very long time, and I sound that warning that we really do need it. But assuming that those reports are published, then I think we will very quickly move into an area where people will roll up their sleeves and, with resources, achieve reform. There is goodwill on the part of the trade union group. I think there is goodwill in terms of the leadership within RTE. I also think that I was asked earlier about whether or not there was any good came out of this. One of the things that I think has come out is the ability of the public to recognise the difference between a management culture and workers on the ground who deliver excellence in adverse circumstances. There is a public, and people will have their differences about editorial decision making, but there is a respect for public service broadcasting, an acknowledgement of what that means, particularly in my experience outside of the Greater Dublin area, where people understand the importance of public service broadcasting, and not just RTE, but also the interest of public interest journalism. And one of the things that informs that is actually, in my view, people being more and more aware of the alternative, that they see the misinformation and they reflect on what happens if you don't have an informed journalism, responsible journalism, ethical journalism. So if I'm being optimistic, I think that we can build on that. And there is a contract that has been broken. It wasn't broken by us, but that contract has to be restored.
Brian?
If we are to draw a line and move on at some stage, and it has to happen, and particularly when we look at the conversations that come up time and time again here today about bogus self-employment, we can refer to the document that was released about the future of RTE, and we can pick out the horror stories about the 20% cuts and the outsourcing. If we can get away from that and focus on what needs to happen, then the only way it can actually live up to the title of a new direction for RTE is to consign bogus self-employment to history. It cannot continue within RTE. It shouldn't continue anywhere. We have the scars on our back from construction. We deal with it day in, day out. RTE is one place that has the ability right in front of it to fix it here and now. Yes, it has work to do in terms of making good on the promises that it broke previously. But if it is to actually fulfil its obligation that it entitles the document the new direction has to be the right direction, minus bogus self-employment.
Okay, thank you very much. Emma, the very last words, yeah?
Very brief. I mean, we just want to be able to do our jobs and have the resources to do so. We want it to be a place where talent can be nurtured and brought on, and we want to do what is our public service remit to the best of our abilities and to the highest quality, and that is to inform, educate and entertain. That's it.
Okay, very quick, Brendan, because we do need to wrap up.
I want to thank the people who've come in today, even the ones we had Barney's with. I do want to thank the union representatives. And could I just ask three things at the very end of this meeting? Very quickly. Would the unions commit to reviewing their handling of the overall bogus self-employment issue with a view to re-engaging with workers who have felt let down in the process? You've heard some of the testimonies today. I think that's a reasonable enough ask. Could I also ask that the unions would review their actions in the context of any potential criminality on the part of RTE and take any steps that they would deem appropriate as a result of that? And just finally then, and very conscious of what Emma was talking about, and absolutely someone who's been very critical in the past as well of RTE's decision, for example, in relation to children's programming, I think it's highly regressive, and some of the aspects of the strategic vision document are highly regressive. Could I ask if there is actually an alternative document that you have put together, or maybe you could put together, in terms of what the alternative vision for RTE, a detailed one in relation to everything from staff to types of programming that could be presented as an alternative to what's being put forward. I think it would be very useful in terms of informing debate on the overall issue. That's all.
I'm going to allow 30 seconds for Teresa. You're indicating to.
I would just say at the end that the document you're talking about, these kind of process would mean a huge partnership or an agreement to get workers out there to do it and get the information. You know, I'm telling you, as representative workers, I've never seen a group of workers that want to be negotiating losing jobs or get rid of jobs. So, I mean, it's the information you need on it. I think the Domino's case that has been part of the recent Supreme Court case would probably tell you where the criminality would be. You know, that's basically, I think we look at that one. Yeah.
Okay. I do need to, Brett, because we have to have a private session. We have to finish up in here by half an hour.
What I'm just asking though, if the unions, having listened to what was said today, and again, these weren't my words, these were words of workers who have approached me as a member of the Oireachtas, a representative of the people. Would you consider what was said and consider your own actions as unions? We all have a role to play here, the Oireachtas, government, Department of Social Protection, Revenue, everyone. But in terms of what you can do, in terms of helping, because you are influential and you do carry weight within RTE as a substantial part of that structure, would you review your actions with a view to seeing, can you help more of those workers who feel disenfranchised?
I have Brian and Seamus indicating, please, 10 or 15 seconds. Brian.
We've dealt with and continue to deal with it as a huge cancer in the workplace. It eats away, it erodes workers' terms and conditions. If we had the ability to lock people up, we'd have jails full of employers. We would. The reality of it is there's loads of laws out there, and there's more that could have passed if they got more support when they went to build stage and so forth. But they were shut down. People didn't support them. The will is there to do whatever can be done to do bogus employment, not just in RTE, through employment in Ireland. There needs greater support from parties and individuals that may be here today and may be outside of this room to make that a reality. But it's not within our gift to lock people up, as maybe that's a loose way of describing what Deputy McGrath said, but it's not that simple. There are lots of laws that suggest things are wrong. It doesn't mean that everyone gets locked up for it. That's not within our gift to do that. But we do pursue it at every avenue.
10 seconds.
Nothing that we represent today is news to me, and our door is always open. I can commit to reopening an agreement. We have certainly no difficulty in looking at how we can assist workers that you have raised. And there are changes. There is a Supreme Court case, which a ruling on the Domino Pizza case, which has direct implications for all of those workers. So that is something that we will be looking at. And political support from all of the parties in relation to the composition of the EU directive on workers and on collective bargaining is probably the strongest thing you can do in terms of offering support. We're more than happy to sit down, but I'm not going to deliver commitments at a minute's notice that I might not be able to meet. Yeah.
Okay, I want to thank all of our witnesses for coming here today and for their input, and indeed to all of our guests. That concludes our public session. And we do need to move into, so for members, we need to move into private session. So we're going to suspend briefly to allow witnesses and guests withdraw from the meeting before we resume again in private session.